You're live.
Okay, thank you. Good evening and welcome to our last virtual meeting of the City of Dublin's Architectural Review Board. Beginning in July, the board will resume in-person meetings. Over the last year, we have greatly appreciated the Ohio Legislature's actions to address the pandemic, including the ability for public entities such as ours to conduct virtual meetings. The meeting procedure for each case this evening will begin with a staff presentation, followed by an opportunity for the applicant to make a presentation. The board will then have the opportunity to ask clarifying questions prior to hearing public comments. Finally, the board will deliberate on each case. Tonight, the meeting can be accessed via live stream on the city's website. We welcome public comments on cases. In order to submit any questions or comments during the meeting, please use the form under the streaming video on the city's website. Questions and comments will be relayed to the board by the meeting moderator. Please provide a valid name and address when submitting comments and refrain from making any inappropriate comments. We want to accommodate public participation and comments to the greatest extent possible. And we'll begin our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. So when the flag is displayed, we will say the pledge. There it is. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. All right. Okay, Judy, could you take the roll, please?
Well, that will be me, Gary. This is Lori.
Awesome.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. So you must be one of the new staff introductions that Nikki's going to be making later.
No, I've been here forever, but Judy took over for a while, so I'm back.
You're back, okay.
Yes. Okay, so calling roll, Mr. Alexander.
Here.
Mr. Cotter.
Here.
Ms. Cram.
Here.
And Ms. Cooper.
Here.
And Frank is not with us tonight. He had a pressing family matter that was the conflict was unavoidable. So, okay, is there an acceptance of the documents and approval of the meeting minutes? Now, you realize these meeting minutes are from our special meeting of May 19th.
I'll move to accept the documents.
I'll second.
Ms. Cram.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Ms. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. Cotter.
Yes.
All right. Well, Nikki, now it's your turn to introduce the newest member of the planning staff.
Great, thank you, members of the Architectural Review Board. We do have some new announcements and developments in the Planning Division. We have had some vacancies over the last year and have had an opportunity to fill those vacancies, which includes Sarah Holt. Sarah Holt is a senior planner with the Planning Division, is a certified planner, and comes to us most recently from the County of Greenville, South Carolina, which, as some of you may know, was an inspiration for some of the infrastructure in the Bridge Street district that connects Bridge Park to historic Dublin. She's also previously worked in the state of Colorado, as well as New Mexico and California, and has both academic research experience as well as professional practice in historic preservation. So, Sarah, I hope I've done you justice, and maybe if you want to, I guess, share a few words, that would be great.
Sure, thanks, Nikki. And good to officially meet all of you. I'm very glad to be here in Dublin and especially working with the Architectural Review Board. I look forward to this an awful lot. As Nikki said, most recently I was Director of Planning in Greenville County, South Carolina. I have to say that I like the Link Bridge a bit better than the Liberty Bridge, and am really looking forward to the park development once that's all done. My thesis in school was in historic and cultural landscapes, and that was at Ball State University. And I served on a historic preservation commission in Manitou Springs, Colorado. And if you've never been to Manitou Springs, you have to go. It's absolutely wonderful. I've done urban design in Highlands Ranch and, believe it or not, military installations all over the country and the world. I used to own my own renovation and restoration company in Manitou Springs and did all the design for some award-winning additions and new builds in that town. And again, I'm just very, very glad to be here and am looking forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm sure we're going to benefit from your experience. Nikki, is there anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, sure. So we'll have an opportunity to kind of, reconvene at the end of the meeting during communications. But with Sarah coming on staff, she is going to be taking the primary role in being the liaison to the Architectural Review Board with Chase in a supporting capacity. So you will still see me at many of your meetings and certainly all those that are happening through the summer. But I will more regularly appear before you as a member of staff rather than a primary. So with that, I will, still be working with you all, just kind of refocusing some of my work on the Dublin Corporate Area Plan as well as the Bridge Street District. So yeah, looking forward to all these opportunities.
It seems like since I've been on this board, every staff member I've worked with leaves before I did. Jenny started as our liaison, then you followed. No, there was someone in between who moved to
Lori.
Oregon. Yes, and then you followed Lori, and so now Sarah's here. So hopefully Sarah will be with us a lot longer than I am. So we'll see. Okay. Anything else, Nikki? Are we ready to move to case procedures?
Nope, I think we're ready to move ahead. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay. The board's responsible for the review of construction and modifications or alterations to any site in review district or area subject to architectural review under the provisions of zoning code section 1.53.170. The board has the decision-making responsibility on these cases. A swearing in of anyone who intends to address the board on these cases is necessary. We will do the swearing in following this first consent agenda item. The agenda order is typically determined at the beginning of the meeting by the chair. As Nikki mentioned, we do have this first case that is a potential consent agenda item. Does any member of the board wish to pull this case from the consent agenda?
I don't.
Okay, all right. All right, this item is Psychic Readings by Lisa. It's for a sign at 16 North High Street. It's a minor project review. This application is a request for the installation of a wall sign and projecting sign for a tenant space within a historic building on a 0.26 acre site zoned Historic District, Historic Core. The site is east of North High Street. It's about 125 feet north of the intersection with Bridge Street. Mr. Rayburn from the staff and the applicant are here this evening to answer any questions. I just want to say to the applicant, I saw Ms. George listed as the representative. Are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Well, you don't. If you're in agreement with the terms, and Mr. Rayburn will go through the staff recommendation. If you're in agreement, we're simply going to vote on the staff's recommendation in this. If you're not in agreement with any of the conditions, that Mr. Rayburn states, then we're going to go through a formal presentation. So I'll have Mr. Rayburn first go through the conditions, and then if you're okay with things, we'll vote.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, everyone. Staff does recommend approval of this minor project review with the following 4 conditions. 1, that the applicant apply for and successfully obtain approval of a permanent sign permit through building standards prior to installation. 2, that all text both on the wall sign and the projecting sign be metallic gold in color. 3, the projecting sign will be located between the primary entrance, the tenant space, and the first window immediately south of the primary entrance within 6 feet of the primary entrance, subject to staff approval. And that's a code requirement. And then the 4th and final condition of approval is that the applicant will remove all temporary signage prior to installation of new permanent signs. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. George, are you in agreement with those terms?
Yes, I agree with all of them.
Okay, thank you. Has there have we received any public comment on this?
We have not.
Okay, okay. All right, is there a motion to approve the minor project review with the 4 conditions?
I'll move to approve the minor project review with the 4 conditions.
Okay, thanks.
I'll second.
Okay.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes,
Ms. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Cotter,
Yes.
Ms. Cran.
Yes.
okay. This case is approved. Thanks for attending the Architecture Review Board meeting tonight. All right, now where we come to our cases, we are going to swear in the witnesses and staff who anticipate speaking before us. So unmute anyone who is prepared to speak and follow along with me. Anyone intending to address the board on cases this evening, raise your right hand and answer in the affirmative. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, or nothing but the truth in your testimony to this board?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you all. All right. Our first informal case is 7284 North High Street. It's an informal review. This application is a request for review and feedback for the redevelopment of a mixed-use site. This is the Oscar site, zoned Historic District, Historic Core. The site is located northeast of the intersection of North High Street and North Street. Mr. Ridge will be our presenter. And Chase, it looks like you're ahead of me on the monitor. So whenever you're ready, go ahead and start.
Great, thank you. Yeah, give me one moment, please.
Okay.
Well, I apologize. I am unable to get this into full screen at this moment, but I'll present from the screen for now, and then if I can bring up full screen, I'll definitely do that. So as was mentioned, this is a request for informal review, providing non-binding feedback for a massing regarding the site located at 84 North High Street in the Historic District. The site is highlighted in yellow on your screen, is located at the northeast corner of the intersection of North High Street and North Street, and contains a number of parcels located between North High Street and North Riverview Street. A bit of case history. You all may recall that this came before the Architectural Review Board. In February of this year, the ARB provided non-binding feedback on an informal review at the time. You know what, I apologize, it looks like it's going to let me bring that up now. There we go. So the informal review was to provide non-binding feedback on a proposal for a mixed-use building, including residential units, an event center, restaurant retail space, as well as associated parking and open space. So at the time, the Architectural Review Board members did have general concern regarding massing, scale, and height, and also expressed potential interest in saving a portion of the building. In May of 2021, the Architectural Review Board members had an opportunity to tour the inside and outside of the buildings located at 72 to 84 North High Street, and had the opportunity to hear about the general conditions of the buildings along with construction and design details. And finally, it's important to note that tonight the applicant intends to seek feedback on the massing studies, which will inform a potential future redevelopment of the site. So it's important to note that this is not intended to be a review of the previous proposal, but of the massing studies provided by the applicant for the site. So jumping into existing conditions, these two photos give you an idea of what exists on the site today, which is the site is roughly outlined by the dotted white line. And you can see it does stretch from North High Street to North Riverview Street. The site contains the buildings located at 72 to 84 North High Street, as well as 20 North Street on the south side of the site. So the applicant did provide a number of massing studies for the board's review and consideration. What you're seeing here on the screen is the Old Dublin Town Center overlaid onto the site in question. Just some general background, Old Dublin Town Center was built around 1999 and is 2.5 stories in height and approximately 25 feet in height as measured per code. So that's from established grade to the midpoint of the eaves. The applicant also provided some details of the Bryhigh development. So this development, like the Old Dublin Town Center, is located near the intersection of Bridge Street with High Street. Bryhigh was built in 2009 and is also 2.5 stories in height. This building, or this development rather, is approximately 30 feet in height, again, as measured from established grade to the midpoint of the eaves. A third applicant massing study was regarding the Cohatch site. So this is directly south of North Street, south of the site in question. This is a recent development and is still under construction to this day. This particular development ranges from 1 stories to 3 stories in height and is approximately 30 feet in height as measured per code. So with that, staff is recommending a number of discussion questions. I won't read all of those aloud right now, but I will have this up for reference. And I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have. The applicant is also in attendance this evening. Thank you.
Chase, thanks. Does anybody have any immediate questions?
Chase, just one quick question on I'm looking at the staff report and it says Cohatch is 35 feet and you said it was 27. What did you just say in that one? I mean, the staff report says 35 and you just said, I think 30 and just if you bring up the 2 slides before, just.
Yeah, I apologize. It is 35. The
35.
presentation
Okay.
stated 30. That's incorrect.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
Now, Chase, clarify where that 35 is from. Is that from on the alley side to the midpoint of the roof?
Yeah, great question. So that was measured, and it is approximate. It's measured from the alley side and to the midpoint of the eaves.
So,
oh, go ahead.
So the portion that's closest to the former Brazen Head is actually much lower per our code, right?
It would be lower. That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
So Chase, just one quick. So it is the 35 feet. Did it have a on this one? I guess it would have been a waiver for that height there, or because because yours says, it says it's inside the code. Is it in or is it not? Just as a reference point.
That's a great question. And Nikki, I apologize if you have a bit more background on that approval.
Yeah, so certainly I can speak to the Coconuts project. So that was approved by the Architectural Review Board in January of 2020. At the time, the board had reviewed that against the Bridge Street District Code that was in place at the time. The building type was historic mixed use. That building type limited buildings to a certain number of stories and did not have a total maximum height. So the building type is limited to 2.5 stories. It was the interpretation of staff and the board at the time that the lower level along Blacksmith was actually not counted. So it would have 1.5 stories on top of that, basically.
Okay.
So 1 story on the front, 2.5 stories on the back.
Okay. So before we were just limited, okay, the height of the floors was slightly different. We were trying to measure it by what the floors look like as opposed to the height, generically.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Clear.
And Nikki, correct me if I'm wrong, because I was on the board at that time. I believe we did grant some waivers on that project. Is that correct?
Yes, the project was approved with waivers, although I do not recall height being one of them.
No, I think one was like the vertical division requirement, and there were some others, but we did show some flexibility on that particular project.
Okay. Yep. Clear.
Mr. McCabe, would you like to present? It looks like you've made some significant revisions since we last met.
Yeah, I would say the revisions we're starting with a clean slate. So we certainly appreciate the time you spent with us on site the last time. We would look forward to some dialogue about your observations of what you witnessed at the building and your feelings on that. But today, really, I think this is all about just extending an open dialogue. There's certainly a desire on the part of the landowner to revisit this and consider what's possible. Again, I think we just put the past in the past and look forward. And the way we thought would be best to do that is to provide some of these illustrations that take a look at other buildings that have been placed in the historic district in a more modern period that have been guided by various iterations of historic district code over the years, dating back to 1999, and see if there isn't some common thought about the virtues and the kind of compare and contrast to those buildings and how they would fit on this particular property. It's interesting that those 2 example projects actually are dimensionally, at least across the High Street face, very similar to the dimension of the property that exists there today. And in fact, the collection of historic buildings that are on that would be the southeast corner of High Street and 161, likewise are very similar in length as well. So there's 3 what we would think are fairly good examples of buildings or collections of buildings that represent in context what historic Dublin has been about and what's about today. So we thought that would be a good place to start, is to take a look and say, if those buildings or those collections of buildings were placed on this site, how would that be perceived? How would that be received? and what sorts of things, given the current modifications to the historic district code, would be in play or out of play or need to be adjusted, or just what's possible. We kind of looked at this in the manner, and I don't know, Chase, are we able to show some slides? Or do you have the kind of the original package we sent over? That might be a way to walk through this rather quickly.
I do have those materials, if you give me one moment.
Sure, so it'd be good to put those up. What you're going to see there is we've been, again, revisiting this, and certainly listened to feedback from our last discussion. We've certainly listened to and read and talked to many people in the area and what their thoughts are. And so we kind of wanted to distill it down to getting back to a basic discussion about what's potentially appropriate. So if you would go to the next slide for me, Chase. So we really see this site in three footprints. So there's clearly a high street component that's all about what's the streetscape in terms of a building massing along that frontage. And then there's the frontage that is along North Street that heads back toward the river. And we've talked about this before, and you guys worked with Cohatch on this as well. Pretty significant fall off, and there's a street face there. North Street's a little bit unique in terms of kind of street-safe conditions within the historic district. Most of the other side alleys are kind of very limited in width, and they're really there for, in the old days of getting horse and buggy down between some buildings to get in behind buildings for servicing or for parking your horse and buggy. This street's a little bit wider. There's much more visibility of this street in terms of being visible from High Street, and also given the current context of it being a very predominant way to get down into that area, back to the new parkland and over to the Crawford Hoying condominium project. So it's for a street going easterly off of High Street, it's kind of a unique thing. It's got much more visibility. And then we've got this C area, which is, it's the back of house in terms of this property, but at the same time, it's very much front in terms of visibility off of the new bridge, the pedestrian bridge. And as we've all seen, particularly post-COVID, Dublin's investment is paying off very well. That's extraordinarily highly trafficked. I can tell you, we actually spend a lot of our time, casual time on that bridge and going back and forth ourselves personally. So, there's a genuine recognition and concern about what that kind of C area will be in its final form. Today, it's, we feel it's kind of the ugliest view in old Dublin or almost anywhere in Dublin. It's the back of buildings, it's parking lot, it's dumpsters, it's utilities. But it should be something that is something that the community wants and embraces and elevates that area in context of everything else surrounding it. Chase to the next one. So again, beyond the footprint of the property that is to be redeveloped, you also then have these streetscapes. And so to us, those are kind of two different things. One is, what's a building facade? How does that fit into the context and into the code restrictions? But then it's also, what do those corridors end up becoming? And that's kind of a different discussion and a different piece of work. It's interesting to have Sarah Holt on board now. Those are things that appears that she's got a very particular background in terms of historic landscapes, and so there's kind of a historic streetscape context that would be in play here. So certainly interested in making sure that we're all paying attention to those. Next, please. So again, we went and did some quick measuring just so we had in our head what kind of historic height conditions exist in the historic district. So this is that property on the southeast quadrant of High and 161. So historically, 17'6", that's consistent with floor-to-floor heights back in that era. Then you have the building, the old Brazen Head house next to us, about the same, a little higher, but about the same. And then next. Then here's the more modern versions of buildings, 19 feet for the building that I always call the Starbucks building. And then the building across the street's a little higher at 24-foot eave. So again, took those two buildings in context. Next, please. And you can go through that one as well. I've already seen that. All right, one more. And there you go. We placed them on the site, and as you can see, they pretty well, and you'll see on the next one as well, they pretty well encompass the front or the high street elevation. And this one goes a little bit further in terms of dimensionally in what would be going down the North Street, but the previous one does not. If you go to the next one, one more, please. Let's go past that one. Go one more. Yep. Try one more. I'm sorry. You get to the backside. There you go. So from the backside, when you look at those same overlays, one more. Again, what you see is there's a substantial amount of property that's left. So if we were to take those buildings and decide that, you know, that's some kind of program this property could support, we still have quite a bit of property that's left. And so it comes down to what's the appropriate use for that. That's kind of that C area. What really should be done with that? There's some slope to it. You know, to replace the existing buildings with just simply with new buildings that sit on a similar footprint and end up with a similar parking condition in the back really doesn't change anything in terms of the perception of what that all becomes with that view off of the pedestrian bridge. So we struggle a little bit to try and understand maybe what direction that should head. So that's part of why we're here, is kind of open that discussion and look at that and say what is highest and best use for that area from a community's perspective, from a redevelopment perspective. So we'd like to just open the door to some dialogue to that, gather some thoughts and ideas of what sorts of things may be acceptable to this board. And then also just to affirm, I suppose, that these buildings, these example buildings, are consistent with your thoughts and interpretations of the existing historic district code in terms of height and mass and configuration and kind of division of buildings, and creating a kind of a collection of buildings rather than a singular massive building. So with that, I just kind of like to open the dialogue and listen to some feedback on your thoughts, and does this start to set some sort of a direction that we should collectively look at?
Before we respond, Mr. McCabe, I had one general, because I think the staff has laid out a whole series of questions that I think are really useful to begin the dialogue. But I wanted to ask you about the rest of your presentation. In the package, and you had, did you have an image in there of something that maybe was a conceptual thought? It was one of the slides that you asked Chase to go beyond. Is that a conceptual thought, or what? I just was curious about that image.
Yeah, what that was going back to, again, we're wiping the slate, so we're not going back to the other project, but I thought it would be appropriate to at least throw in what the prior proposal was on the two buildings on High Street and on North Street, just to have a visual representation of the scalar differences. And what I guess I would put out there is in scale, at least on the High Street side, the scale, as you could see by that, really has a lot of similarity to it. There's some difference in that the buildings where the Mezzo building doesn't quite reach to the corner, So in terms of total mass, it's less mass, but in terms of height and kind of setback and configuration, there's a lot of similarities to what was proposed previously. The other thing in that image, what it's reflecting is working with staff and the administration the first time around, there was a real interest in making sure that that corner had a landing that was kind of had a good relationship to the library plaza across the street. So that's what those yellow lines they were referring to, is just show why that looked like that in its past life. So that's really all that was suggesting, was we just wanted to show that there's some context and some scalar similarities.
Members of the board, do any of you have just general questions before we get into talking about the specifics a little bit more? Okay, I can't see you, Marty, but I don't hear you, so I'm assuming you're shaking your head no too. Okay, all right. Mr. McCabe, if I know you asked two specific questions that weren't necessarily on the list the staff gave us. And I have those written down about the backside and the example buildings. Is it okay if we go through that list in the order of the staff report, and then anything else, like those two questions you asked, if they're not addressed, we'll address them at the end?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
whatever makes it convenient and comfortable for you all.
Okay, it just seems pretty logical because they start with our site visit and then the demolition question. So,
right.
Board members, I'm just going to walk us through those questions. So, does anybody have any thoughts they'd like to share from the site visit?
No.
Okay. How about let's talk about the demolition, because a lot of the reason for the site visit was to get a better sense of what the conditions were, to see how we feel about your demolition. So does anyone want to start on this topic?
Gary, I don't mind going. I'll just say that as far as the site visit, I don't think it gave me too much more than I already knew. I'm okay with demolishing the buildings from the 70s and 80s, the additions. They're not historic, they're not contributing. I have no issue with demolishing those. As far as am I supportive of demolition of the core of the building, I just don't have enough information. We didn't tour it during the site visit. It wasn't available to us. You would just have to bring forth the general demolition permit criteria to let us know about that. But I have no issues with the 70s and 80s additions being demolished.
Okay.
I can go. And I'm the same, I think, from the last meeting. For me, demoing the buildings, and after the site visit, looking at them, certainly they're certainly in the newer buildings. Yeah, it looks to be difficult to renovate them to something very useful. So for me, I'm okay with that. As I know, Gary may have some comments about the Oscar and a few things. Even on the other ones, I think during the site visit, the window, there were a few things that people talked about that maybe were could be considered historic, but I agree with Amy. I could be supportive of I could be supportive of demoing the whole site. As you come back with a demo plan, you go through the rubric that gives us where it is, and ensuring that that there's not something there that would be worth saving. But generically, I am okay with taking the buildings down.
Marty?
I'll just agree with Amy and Sean on their comments. I don't really have anything additional to add. It seems like a full demonstration for demolition is possible given the amount of the building that I've seen so far.
Yeah, and I share board members' opinion as well. And based on I know I was one at our last meeting who had some concerns about the removal of Oscars, but based on, at least now we need to see the documentation, but based on the comments of one of the members of the Historic Dublin, it sounds like there may be evidence, and clearly our guiding documents say it's a non-contributing structure. So I think I think if the proper documentation is prepared for the Oscars, then I can support demolition for the entire site as well. Okay, now this is a trickier one because this is the broadest question of them all. So, and it's a little one. Maybe before I'm going to ask Mr. McCabe a question before we respond to this, because you haven't told us functionally what you want to put in there. So you're just asking us, and do you just want us to respond to size and mass, or programmatically, should we make the assumption that it's probably going to be the same things you were thinking about before?
No, again, let's all look forward and kind of take this as baby steps at a time. And this is with some advisement of the administration, Dublin administration. Their suggestion is come see you early and often. So we're revisiting early, and we'll be doing often. So the steps that we were advised to approach is to start with scale. Got to understand, what's the image, what's this, not necessarily architectural style, but what's the kind of that gestalt view of how should these buildings present themselves to the street. Knowing more of that gives us then some way to start putting together programmatically how you could use those sorts of structures. So if we're limited in terms of height, depth, mass, that may preclude certain types of uses. And again, that what happens on that C area, that easterly side, what may be a vision for that clearly is going to dictate the program. That's the wild card in all this. Getting street facades really is probably the easier thing to do, but really to understand the full capacity of the site. We know there's an 85% coverage limitation, but you got to get there. How do you get back to that area and put it into productive use, and then you start introducing parking considerations and all that. So I think that's our baby step. Is let's just talk about the street frontage and how we start massing it, and we'll back into a program.
Okay, these are going to be the more involved responses, and I erred in at least raising this earlier. We did receive some letter. I know we received at least 3 emails of public comment prior to our meeting. Does any board member see the need to read those? Okay. And Nikki or Chase, have we received any additional comments since?
If not.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry. I skipped that step. Okay. So getting back to the big general question, are we supportive of the site? And if so, what scale do we feel is appropriate? And one of the things we've been asked to address is the back side. How do we feel about the back side of the property? So I'll open it up. And does anybody want to start?
I can start. You want to start from? You just want to go in order? Walk our way around a bit there. So I guess.
Okay.
Or we want to do them in sections. I'm not sure because C is the most difficult, Mr. Vick. Certainly, yeah, we got to go through that. But certainly, in another I took. So I still think as we put the massing together, we need certainly at the street, we need to stay inside the code. So this is the 30 feet and trying to understand how the buildings fit inside of that. Because having variances there for me it starts to be relative. It just starts to be complex as we're trying to do other things. I do like, as we said from the beginning, I think as you think about 30-foot buildings, if they're near the street, as the city council told you, having it set back from the street a little bit, having a place to land so that the mass looks a little farther away from the street front. I think some of those things, as you try to I forget which number it was, but where you have a little bit more room in the front gives a illusion of it looking different. Now, certainly, as Gary said, it's hard to understand the massing of the front until you know what kind of goes in there. But certainly having all those small buildings there probably isn't exactly what it will look like in the future. But for me, staying inside the code at the 30 feet, being slightly back from there, and the first concepts you have there for me look okay. I don't think we want to match exactly what's down the street from an architectural standpoint, but for me, code set back a little bit and some architectural, liberties around what it could look like, especially if you're only, I think originally you said 2 or 3 things in the front. I think finding a way to make that interesting would be okay to me. I'd probably leave it a bit to you. I think not chopping it up too much, but for me, those are my first comments there. I don't know if you want to go all the way around or do them one at a time, Gary.
Let's kind of do them one at a time, and then
Yep.
and then we can come back to areas
Yep.
we haven't addressed adequately.
Yep.
Amy, Marty.
Yeah, I can go. So it's hard for me to separate some of these questions. To me, they all kind of all go together. I will commend Mr. McKay. I love the idea of getting the building figured out and then figure out what can fit in that building, because to me, I'm not so concerned with the use. I'm more concerned with what the building's going to look like. And I mean, I'm pretty simple. I don't have a set number for you. I'm just going to tell you the buildings on the north end of the property should be no taller than the buildings to the north of them. The buildings on the south end of the property should be no taller than the buildings to the south of them. So there's a few ways you can kind of fake the look of height, I guess. If you have a plaza up at the corner, when you superimposed the Bri-Hi and the plaza showed up at the corner, so you have the building removed, the building to the back doesn't look as tall because it doesn't sit right up next to the street. If you want a taller building at the rear, put the taller height to the north because you have taller buildings to the north. So mine is a contextual thing. I can't tell you, hey, it's going to be 30 feet. I think it's going to be closer to 25-ish. I think you're going to be on the lower end. I can't tell you 2.5 stories because sometimes you do the 2.5 or you do 2 and then you put all these dormers on or a steeper pitched roof and it looks taller. So just don't go taller to the building to the north or to the south in proportion. So the building on the north ends can be taller, step it down enough so that you're not taller on the south side. That's all I got.
Okay. Marty, I don't think you had the opportunity to see this before, did you?
No, I went on the tour. I was there.
Okay,
I have not seen the plans. I wasn't a part of the meeting the first time, but I have reviewed that meeting. And one of the comments, I'm just going to make 2 things. I'm supportive of sticking with the height limits. I think Amy has explained that clearly about how the height limits should be accommodated and how they should blend with the existing structures. I must say, just at looking at some of these superimposed developments on the site, that I find that this corner, the one with Bri-Hi that has the corner open and the buildings on North Street down a little bit, is very appealing from a visual development. So I don't know if that's an appropriate comment at this time since we're focusing on the High Street side, but I just like how that whole open corner works personally.
Oh, all right. I guess it's my turn. I generally agree with many of the comments that are made. Now, the one thing I think we need to check is if you do match, because the building to the north of this was done under a different code. So I think if you are close to, and I think matching that height, that scale is appropriate. I don't think you should be penalized if you are matching that, you're matching that fascia height. that our new code, which has adopted a different height, if it has, there would be a case where I would say if it was contextually appropriate, I would support a variance for height. Because I do think that's an appropriate height there. I think opening up the corner, as Marty suggested, and I think others have alluded to, would allow you to make the buildings on the south side lower because you'd have a natural break at the corner. So you could then open that corner up, connect with the system of walks that's been created from the library, and then use that space as your transition to lower buildings. One of the things I had struggled with a little bit in the last presentation is that the height of the expression of the end of the building on the south part of the property. It just seemed, Cohatch, we talked about the height, but they came back a couple times and they tried to hide that upper story. They did some things to try to reduce the apparent height. Now, and there's a question too. I would say if your height there was comparable to what was approved for them, here again, I would say I don't think you should be penalized if you're doing something contextual, and we've adjusted our code to slightly different conditions. I did think it was appropriate before when your building was almost U-shaped and you took more mass next to the building to the north, because it seems to me that's a place where you could hide additional height that you might need because it's next to a taller structure. So I thought that all makes sense. And I do think you could build up what we call the east elevation. So instead of having grade, if you wanted to make, I think the site would be much better if there was an elevation or a facade along that surface. And that's why I was asking about program, because that gives you an opportunity to create a podium. And if you wanted to hide parking underneath that, but publicly you could make a facade there. So you create a front, and you may even make that, I think of like perimeter block schemes where that may have one story. So on that alley side, it's a 2-story structure. And so we don't have to look at parking, but we can close, because I think your concerns are very accurate, and it is a unique site, and it's going to have even more visibility on that back side. I don't think it should be as tall as everything else. I think breaking the scale down would be nice, but I do think you could have at least 2 stories of something along there. Let's go to the question about, because I do think putting those examples up, there are different approaches. Like I'm glad we didn't see an example of what's done in Bridge Park West, where Bridge Park West attempts to look historic, but the scale of those buildings is very different than the historic structures. So now, one expression of the Starbucks building is it's really broken up into a lot of divisions. And but how does the board feel about that? Do you think we should have an expression like that is appropriate, where it looks like a lot of smaller buildings, or the building to the north is a pretty, even though it has some dormers, it's a pretty singular element, and the library across the street we know is something else. So how do you feel about the expression? Do you want to see it broken up into a lot of small ones? Do you think maybe broken up into a few volumes along there?
For me on that one, Gary, I think, broken up into how it makes sense of how we're going to use it, right, Mr. McKay? I mean, I wouldn't, if you're going to put 2 things in there and having 5 storefronts, for me would be a bit strange. So I think Amy's heard, contextually, it's nice to have something that breaks the facade so it has some architectural character, but to say we're going to do it just because we're going to make it have character, I don't think it's quite the right way either. That it would feel very false to me that somehow we have one building and it looks like it has 3 fronts. So that I wouldn't like so much. But certainly I think, as Gary said, as you move from, if you're going from south to north, and how that original south part of that, how it kind of bombards you with the first, it's how to soften that. And I think Gary's put a few, how he might be, or what Amy said, how do you step it down a little bit so it's just not right there when you're crossing the street from going north.
Yeah, I agree. I would recommend don't try to replicate what we already have at the Bry High and the Old Town. I said just start from a clean slate, divide up your building logically. Don't try to create some fake building that looks like 5, because it never looks right. I mean, you look at Bry High, the fake firewalls kind of that they put in, they just don't look right. They're not real. It's just I mean, you know how to design good buildings to fit what you want to use it for. You can pull some parts forward and some back and create little plazas or whatever, but I do not encourage a replication of what we already have.
Okay, I'm looking at our list, and we have covered here 1 through 4 pretty well. I don't know if we all responded to number 5, along Riverview, maximum height or number of stories that would be recommended. I mentioned something smaller, but thoughts that the other board members may have about the Riverview side.
I'll say one guiding point would be just absolutely make sure the buildings to the east side of the site or the rear of the site are no way taller than the High Street facade. Like they should not be higher. And again, it's a matter of sloping down. I think you can get away with more height the closer you are to the north end. I think as you go to the south end, you need to lower it down. We're attempting to keep some residential buildings there now, and those are going to be very short and dwarfed by what we are putting in here. So again, contextual, can't give you an exact number. And for me, the whole to the middle of the eave thing means nothing to me, because you could do a really steeply pitched roof with a huge dormer or something, and it adds another 12 feet. So to me, it's just the overall height of the building, whatever you're putting on it.
There's one question, because most of us are talking about potentially more development on the property than the examples that are dropped on there. But question 6, I think, is a good one about open space and coverage. I think a couple of us have commented and looked at positively to providing open space in the public realm. Sean mentioned moving the buildings back a little bit in the front, which I think benefits the streetscape. I think Marty and I like also having that corner open, tying it with so the open space that you're providing is benefiting the community, not just your development. Other thoughts board members might have about open space.
Well, I come back maybe just quickly to Amy's, because certainly in the back, I think there's some opportunity for it to being slightly, having some contextualize the height, right? I think the original I forget the original was 5 stories, I think, or something like this. And I think, as Amy said, I think there's a way to blend that in, and as she says, contextually. Certainly, potentially when originally you might have parking and other things. I think there's a way to be sensitive to the streetscape back there, as there's still going to be some other houses back there. But certainly, I think there's a way to say, as Amy said, if it's depending on where the eaves are. I mean, 30 feet or 24 feet or 35 feet. I think if it's interesting about how it fits into the buildings around it, I think I could be supportive of trying to find a way around that. So I think for me, just talking about the back could be okay. And certainly on the green space in the back, I'd have to look at. I'm not sure what you would have in the back as green. You know, if you think about the front, that's where the pedestrians will be. You know, what do we think the traffic is in the back? It's hard for me to visualize. There's going to be people who live there and maybe walk the dog, and people will see it from the other side. But open space in the back. Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of the courtyard just because I'm not sure who's going to go in there when the sun is in a different place. And I'm having a hard time contextualizing what open space in the back might look like. It could be interesting, but I just having a hard time seeing what we would use it for, that it wouldn't be a bit false that you're gonna have people, you're gonna have benches back there that there wouldn't be anything for anyone to go back there and look at.
I did, and Marty's mentioned it too. I mean, when you put the overlay with the plaza that was on that south end, I think that really helped break up the block. So that is one possible thing. I think that help the building look smaller. The other thing is, you know, you're allowed to go to 85%, but we don't have to. So we don't have to fill everything. And as Gary suggested, some type of underground or parking underneath with maybe a plaza on top might be a great way to use the space rather than a surface lot, and a potential to maybe even put in like a limestone retaining wall that would, I mean, right across the river, there's a really nice, you know, when they put the plaza in right across the river, and they have that nice, well, it's clad in limestone, but retaining wall. They have some nice features over there at the new park on the other side of the river, right across from this property, that you could take inspiration from, so that you have a better view from the back. But I would just say, yeah, you know, we don't have to hit 85%, so we can find ways to find open space in there, I'm sure.
Any other comments from the board members? Mr. McCabe, do you have any additional questions for us?
Maybe not so much questions. I would say, you know, this is what we were hoping to have happen. This is certainly productive feedback. I'm feeling like we've got more of a shared understanding of what this site is and what the possibilities are and what the constraints are. I didn't hear anything today that felt like it was putting maybe additional constraints on the property. Just to get it off my chest, I was feeling that a little last time, but I don't feel that this time, and I appreciate that. I know the owner would appreciate that as well. You've given us some opportunity to get creative. You know, having a little bit of potential latitude on the north side and how that massing may come together. I think the next time we come see you, that'll be a primary focus. I think that will help drive a better understanding of programmatically what's possible. So we'll study that kind of in multiple directions and see how that goes. Just to be clear, so that I'm looking at this the right way, this 30% is taken from, it's called eave, but is it really meaning the gable? So if we're on the gable end, we're talking about halfway up the roof line from the eave to the ridge. That's the 30 feet, correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding. Now, Chase and Nikki, you're right on the screen, so please go ahead and answer.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, all right, so that's just a clarification. We see that kind of a measure a lot of times, that they usually refer to an eave and a ridge and halfway in between, and so we understand that. So that's helpful. I think from Amy's comments, kind of your last comment, Amy, about that kind of the base, whether that, you know, create some kind of stone base wall on the east side. Again, just to be on the same page, to do something like that, are you thinking that helps us reestablish what our grade point would be from a measurement point of view. So if we did a wall like on the other side of the bridge, does that now become our base point and we measure from the top of that wall up for our building?
Again, for me, it's not an exact measurement. It's just when you're standing there, how massive and tall does this look compared to the buildings to the north and the building to the south?
Right.
So I don't, as far as how code is legally going to measure, grade to it can say, yes, you're in code. This is your new grade. You've reestablished a grade. But mine is I look at it visually compared to the surroundings, I guess.
Right. Right. So I guess if we look to the Cohatch building across the street and there's a line that gets you from their base across North Street to our property corner, that's at a pretty constant elevation today. What happens is you go north then on North Riverview Street, you fall another probably as much as a story or more going north. So the idea of stepping buildings down along North Riverfront Street, so where Gary was suggesting, maybe a couple of story building following North Riverview Street, from a practical point of view, it probably wouldn't make sense to follow that grade necessarily. But if we could find a way of stepping down some and then infilling the difference with some sort of a stone masonry condition or something, we could figure out how to program that side of the building. Before that is a difference in thinking, and appreciate that. From where we were before, we weren't really programming that lower elevation on North Riverview. We were just simply providing access to a parking structure. But if we look at it again and say, what could we do to program that side of the building and really bring the context of a streetscape all the way around 3 sides of the site instead of 2, that's a new thought. And so I just wanted, if we're going to go there, and Jonathan's kind of explore that a little bit, I just wanted to have some sense of context of, are we thinking alike on potentially what we do there? Because again, you could turn that corner and all of a sudden get to the north end, and visually it could start to feel like it's a 4-story plus building over there when maybe not ought to be. But if there's, I know there's some ongoing work to develop that slope underneath the bridge. I don't know if that planning is completely done yet or not, Chase and Nicole, but maybe there's some way to integrate those two things as we get to that northern point, that northern tip of this property. Maybe there's a way to layer that together and kind of take that height out of it by what you do kind of ground down there. So we'll have to think about that a little bit more, but that's a new thought. So we'll appreciate that, and we'll look at that further and see what we could do there.
Okay.
I think this gives us a good launch point again. We'll have to think it through, and at least it feels like we got a better bubble around our property. I think we have a better kind of alliance on what those bounds are, and very much appreciate that. Appreciate your time, and
good.
We'll look forward to coming and seeing you again.
Go ahead, Nikki.
So in the interest of the record, as the chair, would you mind going through the questions and trying to just summarize the board's feedback? Obviously, there are lots of complex issues to consider.
Okay. Now, board members, correct me if some of these questions are very complex. I think there were no new thoughts. Question 1, do we have any new thoughts or comments that we'd like to share based on the site visit? I think their comments and thoughts really relate to the demolition, which will be question 2. I think generally everybody is supportive of the demolition of the buildings across the site, with the qualification that we need to see a little bit more evidence, documented evidence about the history of the Oscars, but the board is inclined, if that documentation meets the standards of our code, to support that. Okay. So is the board supportive of redevelopment of the site? I think I think it's pretty clear. We've all said, yes, we are supportive of the redevelopment site. What scale would we find? I'm going to summarize this one because I will say a scale that is comparable to the adjacent structures. It seems like we have all been responding in that way. The one exception being there's nothing on the east elevation, but we are open to the potential of some development on the east side as well. Okay. Now, this is given the significant change of grade, question 5 on the site from west to east. Could the board be supportive of additional height in excess of what the code permits along? Now, here again, this is on North Riverview. If so, what maximum building heights or number of stories would be supportive? So this is getting real specific. That's where we were talking about the wall. That's a little bit harder one to put in one sentence. I will venture this. If it's more than co-hatch, we would have a problem with it. So it needs to at least be responsive there to co-hatch. Any other ways, board members, you want to fill in this one?
I think you got it. I think what does it say? Given would we be supportive of some additional latitude in the height? I think yes, but I think to Amy's point, it has to be sensitive to the surrounding. You know, we wouldn't want it to be at 30 feet with something decided at 20, right, Mr. McCabe? So yes, supportive of something different, but if it's different in a way that looks out of scale to the structures around it, then we would not support that. And even at the maximum, even at, I think as Amy said, even at the let's say stated height in the code, there would certainly be some challenges if it didn't look right to what was sitting right beside it.
Keep it lower than your High Street overall height. So that the tallest roof element along High Street needs to be the highest point of this entire development.
Oh yeah.
Right. Yep.
And is the board, what considerations should be related to site layout, lot coverage, and open space? I think a number of us saw the benefit of open space in the public realm that's shared by the development and the public outside the development. So the corner, I think we all saw the value of having a corner open. That's the corner on the southwest corner. I think a number of us saw the benefit of having buildings back a little bit so the streetscape could be used as perhaps spillover and seating space for restaurants. Also, but I think an important qualifier is just because you can fill the entire site doesn't mean you need to fill up the whole site. Okay. Board members, Nikki, okay. Do we need to get even more specific? I think
I would like to just add one small thing that has to do with the redevelopment and the considerations. I do want to reiterate the support for looking at what can be done to create basically frontage on North Riverview so that perhaps the property is open from both the High Street side, as we've talked about with that access corner, but then also made open. And I wanted to tie into what Sean said about using some of that height change to conceal some parking. So I just wanted to reiterate that those were some thoughts we had shared, or at least some members had shared, that I found to be also productive.
Okay. Okay, good. All right.
Thank you. I appreciate the additional summary and clarification.
No, thank you. I think that was important. Thanks for reminding us. All right. Mr. McCabe, thank you for coming back. And it sounds like this was beneficial for you. So we'll look forward to seeing you again.
No, it very much was.
Okay.
Very briefly.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right. We'll move on to our second case. This is also an informal review. This is for the Apothecary at 3032 South High Street. The application is a request for an informal review and feedback for the renovations, additions, and associated site improvements to 2 historic buildings located on 2 parcels totaling 0.25 acres, Zone Historic District Historic Core. The site is east of South High Street. It's approximately 75 feet north of the intersection with Spring Hill. Ms. Holt will be our presenter. So, Sarah, whenever you're ready, just go ahead and start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, board members. Let's see if I can bring this up here. I apologize. I have
I think the hardest part of the job is the IT requirements.
you got it.
Yeah.
I had it all brought up and, oh, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Sarah, I'm happy to share that for you if you would like me to.
Could you please, Chase?
Yeah, definitely. Give me
Thank
one
you so
moment.
much. Terrific. Thank you, Chase.
That's the wrong case.
Oh, it is. I need the other one, please, 3032.
You are very right. I apologize about that.
I have it. I'll do it.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you, Nikki. All right, excellent. Thank you so much. Oh, there's a lag on this, isn't there? Okay, so this is case 21084. It's an informal request for 30 and 32 South High Street in historic Dublin. And Dan Morgan from B. Hall Sampson Dietz is the representative. He is here tonight. This aerial shows the location of Bridge Street and the site outlined in yellow. These are 2 vacant properties. Number 30 is on the north side. Number 32 is on the south side. Both are registered on the National Register of Historic Places. And I'll just remind the board that this project was evaluated using the new code and the new guidelines that were recently adopted. This is the zoning. It was the zoning of the site. Again, the new zoning is Historic District Historic Core, and the surrounding zoning is mostly the same with a little bit of historic residential directly to the east. The next slide shows the existing conditions from essentially the front. 30 South High Street is one of the last remaining log structures in town. It's a former pharmacy. Building number 32 South High Street was built as a more traditional commercial building. It's a former grocery store, and both buildings date from the 1840s. Interesting to note that these two buildings have been vacant for about a decade. Some more existing conditions at the rear and the side. Number 30 has a side entry and an added dormer at the top. Number 32 has a rear addition that the applicant is proposing to keep with this application. In the rear yard for number 30 South High Street, we see the shared stone wall that's along the common property line. And then we see additions, kind of a salt box addition and another shed addition that are proposed to be removed with this application. At number 32 South High Street, we see the rear yard details, and the left photo shows an old privy with the diamond window and a shed, and then again, the common rock wall that exists between the two property lines. Some details that just indicate the condition of the outbuildings and the wall. The privy does have some holes in the roof. However, I can attest that the door is operable and the interior is intact. The shed foundation is in some disrepair, as you can see. It sits on a wood foundation. And the stone wall also has some disrepair. There are some areas where the dry laid portion is tumbled down. It appears that the upright stones have been mortared in place. And then there's kind of a unique cross wall that exists about halfway up the property line. The applicant provided this existing conditions map that just gives us a little bit more indication of what the proposal is all about. If we click once, we'll see the addition onto building number 30 to be removed. And then if we click again, you'll see the additions to remain at the back of building number 32. Click again and we'll see the historic stone wall where that exists. And click again and again, and you'll see the privy and the shed. And there's an awful lot of existing trees on the site. However, a site visit did reveal that many of those are ailanthus trees and are actually a nuisance and perhaps a detriment to some of the historic structures. So we move to the proposed site plan, also provided to us by the applicant. At number 30 is a proposed bourbon and cigar lounge. With building number 32, they're looking to put in a wine and appetizer charcuterie board kind of business. It's important to note that the on-site parking is proposed to be provided at 33% of what is required, with 66% being off-site. And let's see if we can start clicking. There is the addition on the back of number 30. And the next click will show us an outdoor terrace that's proposed to be shared between the two buildings, the two businesses. The next graphic shows the small addition at the back of building 32 for an entry feature. And next, we are just locating the privy and the shed that are proposed to be removed with this application. And next shows just the location of the existing stone wall. And then another click shows us how that wall would be dismantled and replaced around the proposed parking. So additional information that was used for staff to take a look at this application includes, as I mentioned previously, that the newly adopted codes and guidelines were used for this informal review. We note that the uses are permitted and the size criteria from the new code have been met by this application. We see that the parking requirements are 10 spaces per 1,000 square feet. So a total of 37 spaces are required. And regardless of the direction that we go in, an off-site parking plan will be required for a formal review. We've talked about trees on the site and the fact that there are both quality and nuisance trees, and some kind of tree survey will be required for a formal review. And then we'll just note that the new design guidelines will apply for both materials and elevations for formal review. And a little bit more analysis that staff did so that we can talk about the parking situation in a little bit more detail. The new code allows for off-site parking to be used towards the required parking for a project. It has to be within 600 feet of the site. And there are 4 locations, the Dublin Community Church, Franklin Street lot, Visitors Bureau, and the Town Center lot that would apply. And then there are additional parking resources that may or may not, the 600-foot buffer clips some spaces at the Darby lot and the John Wright lot. And then of course the library parking garage is located very nearby, but that can't be counted by code because it is outside of the 600-foot buffer. So finally, staff has identified the following questions for discussion amongst the board. And Mr. Chairman, I won't read this in great detail. They are also in your staff packet. And I would love to turn it back to you and open it up for any discussions.
You're on mute, Gary.
I'm sorry. Any questions? I was complimenting Sarah on the presentation. Okay. Any questions for her prior to hearing from the applicant? Okay. Mr. Morgan, would you like to discuss the project?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you clearly.
Very good. Good evening. I'm not sure if everybody is on the board that remembers this project from 2018. We previously looked at redeveloping the site. The plans that we're showing now are very much in keeping with what was already once approved. There's a sale of the property in question, and the sale of the property is hinging largely on the approval of the business plan for the parcels. So largely what we're seeking to learn tonight is, does the concept of 2 tavern type establishments have legs for these 2 parcels? Will we be permitted to develop the site in a similar fashion to what was previously approved? Mainly the removal of the lean-to, the salt box addition and lean-to addition to 30, shoring up and the addition on 32, and adding a secondary addition onto the west side of 32, and then modifying the existing stone wall, repurposing it to provide for our shared parking plan on site. That's largely what we're seeking today. The architecture, we haven't developed that much further from what we had previously designed in 2018. I will say that in our informal discussions with the interested party, we'll say the Corwins, that the architecture that they're leaning towards what was already approved, the previous design, with the exception that at 30, we had a 2-story addition, which was quite massive. We're looking at doing that as a 1.5 stories, so it's more of a single story but taller space. The outdoor terrace is important to both structures, and they would like to have dual access from 30 and 32, just so that people could commingle and be a shared use for both businesses. Other than that, I'm looking forward to hearing comments and feedback and help shed some light on the right direction to proceed to having a successful project.
All right, before we start our discussion, does anybody have any questions for Dan?
Yeah, maybe just one question, because that was because the one thing, certainly the wall will come up in more detail. And I was unsure when I look at, you say repurposing the wall, what do you have in mind for that? Just before we get into whether it's demo or not, but what does that look like in your mind?
So this wall, as it currently sits, it's a wall to demarcate to demarc property boundaries.
Yeah.
It's a dry stacked wall with some stones mortared in at the top. So very similar. We're using to demarc on the proposed site plan to demarc pathways through the site to help act as a screening wall for the parking area from Blacksmith Lane. It's not building a 6-foot tall wall, but it's about a 30-inch tall wall. In some places, it's about 6 inches tall, but dry stacking it in much of the historic fashion, but using it elsewhere on site.
Okay.
I would say that we would be, I think that if we are granted a larger parking reduction, we could provide maybe a third of the parking that we're proposing on site, and that would give us alternative methods or alternative ideas to modifying, working with the existing site wall. So I think that's also up for discussion.
Yep.
And I think I'm the only board member who was on the board when the project, Mr. Morgan previously submitted to us. And we did approve exactly what's being requested here with the removal. We did approve the removal of those structures. We did approve the relocation of the wall. So that's all accurate. Have we had any public comment about the project?
We've not had any additional public comment other than that provided to the board in advance of the meeting.
All right, I know earlier the lawyers were extremely supportive of the earlier project, but we can talk, that's the Vesches who own the property that is directly to the south. We can talk more about that here in a moment. Okay, so we should move into our question. The first one is, do we support the demolition of the 2 additions between 30 High Street? There's a privy, a shed, and the demolition and relocation of the wall. And do we need to see the site plan again to see where those are? Would that help? Nobody's answering in the affirmative. Okay. Okay. So the wall, as you can see, is running right down, splitting the properties in half. And I think you can see the structures on 30 that have been requested to be removed.
So I mean, certainly the additions on the later additions of 30 and 32, for me, I have no issue removing those. I would like to talk maybe a little more about the stone wall, just to see if there's some other way. I mean, I think we can come back to parking, but certainly some of that wall looks to be just when I walk by, it looks in relatively good shape. Seems like a bit of a shame to take it down, but okay, I see the challenge with it sitting in between in between. Yeah, I don't have an issue taking them down. Again, they just sit in a bad place. We're trying to reuse the space. So I would like to maybe come back to a little more in discussion between the board about the stone wall and what maybe can be done there. But certainly the first two, I'm okay with.
Yeah, and the one other piece I wasn't clear before is the privy, which is back, and I think Sarah will probably highlight it right now. That's also being requested to come down.
Yeah.
Okay. Marty, Amy, your thoughts? And we'll come back to the wall, Sean, after we all talk. Then I think Mr. Morgan can answer our questions.
Yep.
I'll speak to the building, the 30 South High building. In order to be comfortable with removing the first addition to the east, not the small like enclosed walkway addition, but the other part that creates the salt box roof, I'd want to see, so this building, if it was built in 1840, it was either built as a hall and parlor, probably one story, one room on each side. And then it was later converted into this salt box. They probably like they made those all the way up to the 1900s. So they added the dormers, they added the shed to the rear. But over time, still 1900, or even if that was done earlier, because salt boxes were as early as the 1850s, those are historic in their own right. So I'm not convinced it's just this extra addition. I would want to see structurally what an architect says historically is the footprint of this building. So clearly the one in this, with the door, like that is clearly an addition. I'm totally fine with removing that, the farthest one to the east. What I'm not convinced is the other portion, and I'd like to know more about the date of that addition. And obviously, again, we would have to have the demolition permit information about it. It's structural integrity and economic benefits and all the normal criteria. So that's kind of where I am with the additions on that one. As far as the privy, I would really love for you to keep it and incorporate it as a feature if possible. Just because we have so few left of them in our city. It's very unique find that's left. I would love to see it incorporated somehow if we could. The shed I'm not as concerned with. I mean, we have other sheds and, but again, I think the sheds, the privy, the shed, and the wall are all wonderful features. I would forgo parking waivers all day long to keep those things. To me, they're just as important as saving the trees and stuff. They're part of our historic Dublin that we're losing. So if there's any way to incorporate that stuff, that would be my preference.
Marty?
let me see here.
Marty, I think you're muted right now.
I had some questions about the privy also, actually. Is that like just an open, what is that? Is that a health concern? Is that can the applicant please enlighten me a little bit? I was not on the board when this came forward before.
It's an old abandoned privy. I believe it's a home to cats or raccoons or other rodents in the city. I did not go in there. But we witnessed animals coming and going and things go along with that. I don't know what else you want to know.
Well, it's not I mean, is the hole still there? What's the story? Is it just like an open? I realize that the structure itself is unique, but can it be relocated on the property, or is there something significant about its location, Amy, that maybe,
Well, assuming it's in its original location, my guess it was probably put in, it could have been anywhere between up to the 1920s. I mean, so it probably hasn't been used since the 1930s. So there's no health concern there. We're probably 90 years since that thing has been used last. But we have one other privy on the north side, and it actually is a different type. It actually had a removable, like cleanable pit. It wasn't dug down into the ground. My guess this one is dug down into the ground. But we've had other ones in our history that have been moved from private residences in this area. One we kept and put over at the Kaufman House in Dublin. It came from over in this area, but we have so few of them left, and they used to be every household had one, and there's very few left. So that's why I would say if it's possible to kind of restore it, and to me it's a unique find. Not restored as in people use it but locked and animals won't get in it, but it's something people can see.
Mr. Morgan, do you want to talk a little bit about, I know a little bit about the background because I've heard some of this before. Talk a little bit about the stone wall. I think, Sean has some questions about that and the need to relocate that, and then talk about the also why you want to remove the first addition to 30 South High.
Okay, well, let's start with that one first. So that lean-to addition, it is much later, or not, it's much more recent than the log structure. You can see in 2018, we did actually do a site visit with the ARB. Mr. Alexander, you'll recall that. We walked around through both buildings, and there's a very clear demarcation that lean-to addition. It may or may not have a foundation. It is 2x4 studs, 2x4 rafters, whereas the log structure is actually repurposed, looks like repurposed railroad ties, we believe, for the wall structure, and the roof structure is actually, it's a combination of lumber and some, I believe, trees. I think I recall seeing bark on some of the roof rafters still. Actually, they were just cleaned up tree trunks. So in the condition of the lean-to structure, once you walk out of the log structure through the old back door, you walk down several steps and you see the foundation of the log structure, and you're into the first addition, which is the roof. You can see from the exterior pictures, the roof is undersized and has a sag to it. They did a best attempt to make it match up, to make it look like a salt box with the existing log structure roof, but it doesn't quite line up. And then it slopes down to an even lower shed addition, which is the one I think everyone is in favor of removing. I do recall from the previous submission, we looked at doing an addition on the rear, similar to what we ended up designing, but we looked at working with an addition and salvaging that first edition, salvaging the first edition, the shed edition. But when we discovered we were basically having to rebuild that and restructure it and give it a foundation, it was, determined that the original log structure was the most important piece to salvage, and that the addition that we designed for the west side, in not blending the architecture, but it was a nice nod to the past. It wasn't faux historic. It was just a subtly detailed building that looked nice and actually helped tip its head to the log structure. So that is the two 2 cents on the addition and why we think we should remove it. The stone wall, I think we could certainly come up with a site plan for the outdoor patios to keep more of the site wall in place, and maybe there's more openings going through it. You're looking at the proposed plan, quite a bit of green space between the outdoor terrace and entry patio and the parking area. You know, that stone wall, I don't see why it couldn't just stay in that place. And perhaps some of the stone wall could actually streak across the terrace, as long as, you know, we would just have to, we'd like to put openings in it so you can have free flowing pedestrian traffic between the two venues.
Okay, thanks. I haven't weighed in on this first question, and one of the things that will have to happen here, I support the demolition of what's been requested for a couple of reasons. One, I think when they do the paperwork that's now required for demolition, and that's unfortunately that's part of our code that's changed. It's a little bit more formalized to request a demolition. I think they're going to be able to meet those standards. I also think it's a bad practice for a board to, once approved something, regardless of who the people are, once approved something and to go back on a previous approval. And the stone, I see this stone wall is very different than the stone wall on Mr. Morgan's previous project that we reviewed. I don't see any comparison in the approach one takes to one. That stone wall is so unique. I don't think on the previous project, on the other side of Bridge Street, there's nothing else like that. I think the previous board felt there are so many walls similar to this one that they're requesting to remove, and that the site development, and we can talk more about the parking here, is really crucial, particularly with this use, that removing the stone wall was the better of the potential problem of limiting the parking even further. So I'm going to be supportive. I do like the suggestion of reusing the shed, or not the shed, the privy, finding a way to move that someplace on the property and use it as a little outbuilding, or use it in some way. So that's my feeling about number one. Do we support? Okay, now it's a little bit hard to tell without three-dimensional drawings. Are we in support of the site layout, including the location, size of additions?
I can go because I also actually have one thing that kind of went back to number one. If you're looking into demolishing the rear salt buck addition, again, if you're looking to keep that log structure and put it back towards that, and that's what you're preserving is that 1850 era, then I would highly suggest removing the dormers and getting rid of the other things that were added later as well. That's just my 2 cents. But as far as the layout of the additions, the addition on 32 South High is fine. It's already a really long building. You're adding just a small thing at the end. I'm okay with adding something small at the end. I have heartburn on the addition on the 30 South High building. It's very large compared to the original building. It's not subordinate to the original building, which is against our suggested historic design guidelines, that any addition should, you should be able to feel that original building. So I think something needs to be done to differentiate that addition.
Well, can I speak on that?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
The goal of that is actually, it is a larger footprint, but the roof line would be secondary to the log structure. Further, what we're showing, it's hard, again, it's hard without the three-dimensional drawings. That's definitely the next step. The next time we come back, we'll have more developed drawings and designs. But there's actually a low slope, nearly flat roof connector, hyphen connector between the log structure that you actually walk through and come into the larger addition. And we've been talking, conceptually about the use of the spaces, and that area in the log structure is definitely a special space. You're not going to, the interior is going to read much like the exterior, where when you walk into that log structure, you're going to know that you're in a special space. You're in the historic building, original building. It's not going to be like a vanilla box that runs with the same language on the inside from High Street all the way back to the terrace. It's going to be unique and I think really do the log structure justice.
And that's the direction I would hope that it's going. But you can't tell from me looking at a flat, it's just you're adding the 3 times the length of the original building, and that's all I see. And so yes, you definitely need to just make sure that you're highlighting the original building and that you're not overwhelming it with your addition.
Mm-hmm. I like your comment about possibly removing that front dormer. What we found during our early exploration was actually that there was a door on High Street.
Yeah, if you look at
two windows.
Yeah, it's most likely your typical hall and parlor. It was going to be 1 story. It might have had a half story that had a loft, but it was just 1 story. It had a center door, a window on each side. It was 2 rooms. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the part you want to bring it back, and you're removing that later addition that turned it into the salt box, I'm all for taking all those other features off, like the dormers, the side doorway on the north side, and truly making it the original building that it was, which the city did to another building over at Farish Wright Park. They put it back to the original cottage that it was. It had additions that had been made in the 1890s and 1910s and 20s, and the city did that. So you could go look at that building if you're curious, but they did that.
Sean or Marty, question 2, do you have any feelings about the layout, the size of the additions?
For me, I went with Amy. The first thing I was just thinking is just make sure that it's clear where the original building was and the addition is subordinate to that, right? It looked to me like there was a hyphen, so I see that in it looks like you were trying to differentiate that. So for me, you have to find some balance to make sure that it's clear that there's one building that is historic and the rest of it is the next thing. So what Amy said for me is what I was going to say. So
perfect.
And the one on the other side for me is okay. 32.
I'm in agreement with the prior comments from the board. Thank you.
Yeah, I am as well. And I think it'll be easier to do this time around because the building's not going to be as tall. So I think it'll be easier to accomplish that. The next question, should parking be provided on site, or would the board support a waiver to the parking requirement in order to preserve the historic elements of the site?
I know I already mentioned I'm all for a waiver if it can save the historic elements of the site. The one thing we do need to make sure of is that we're not having any parking on the residential areas at all. We want to make sure people aren't trying to park by the residences to the east, but I'm all for a waiver. I think now that we have the parking, I know the parking garage doesn't count towards their thing, but there's less parking now on South High Street because of the parking garage on North High Street. So people who are frequenting the library aren't trying to find a spot down on South High Street now. So I think it's going to be easier to find room.
I have a clarification question because on the proposal, it talks about, I had written it down that we needed 37 spaces were required and only 9 are provided. And on the drawing, it's saying 27 spaces are, so 20 spaces for the 30 South High and 17 for 32 South High is 37, and it's only providing 9. So I just had a little bit of a clarification on that. What aren't we at 37? Isn't that what's required?
37. Yes. There's a typographic error on my part.
37 spaces are required.
Okay, and so that would be the variance that would be required. The second thing was if you are, I'm kind of curious on this drawing. I was a little confused, but it says stone wall to be salvaged is the part that bisects the proposed parking areas, correct?
Correct.
And then the stone wall to be removed would be the part that's up here by the outdoor space, correct?
Right. Well, I think both, well, removed, salvaged. I think the idea is not to take the stone wall and just chuck it or move it elsewhere. It's to repurpose it around the site. So that site wall, it's tough to read on this graphic, but it actually starts up between, up just to the kind of right in the midway of 32.
Yes, I went to the
It
site
extend-
as well, so I saw it, and I
Yeah,
know
it
it
extends
runs.
like
Yeah,
the site. So there's just a lot going on. That just happens to be where the note is, but that stone wall spans almost it's 3/4 of the site. So the thought being that we'll salvage it. We're not just going to haul it off to a dump or a landfill or to another landscaping team. We're going to repurpose it around the site, using it as similar
but
to what
if
site
it
feature.
could be retained, if that stone wall could just be retained and then have an access area between the outdoor terrace and the adjacent property, is that something that the development would consider?
Provided that we could come up, that would be a parking waiver would be supported. The other part of currently this parking plan per code, per code, you're required to provide a accessible parking space to your building with on-site parking. Currently, we have a shared parking lot for the two structures. So our accessible space is provided in that shared lot. If we need to keep that wall, it's a little bit of a gray area. I think we'd have to maybe talk with the Dublin Building Department to get some grace on that, so that it could be a shared parking lot that is bifurcated by a landscaping wall, and we would have. I think I did the math. You get a handicap space, an accessible space, and room for a waste, small mini toter waste area on one side, and three head-in spaces on the other. So we'd have, I think, a total of 4 parking spaces on the property, plus the 3 on the street. So it'd be 7 provided spaces on the site. So
I guess I'm a little bit confused as to why you're saying that there's not enough space to pull in for 6, 7, 8, and 9
you can't,
without the wall being removed.
because if you back out of 6, 7, if you back out of any of the spaces that on this plan, the site wall is there, you're going to go right through the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see any way of,
This parking lot is based on the zoning standards for the city of Dublin.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks for the clarification on the drawings.
I'm sorry for that, and I have to apologize for that typo. Sorry
Oh,
about
no, and I just was trying to get some clarification on how it's being displayed here on the drawings that you have submitted that show the parking requirements.
Mhm.
So generic, I'm a bit with Amy. We talk so much about walls and trying to retain these things, about how we would do it. I'm struggling to see how you would do it exactly, because you're going to need some. I don't know if accessible parking is needed on site. I'm not sure exactly how I read it, but I'm not sure exactly how the code reads. I'm with Amy. I would be open to a variance, but I'm not sure how much we can vary, because at some point I think you're going to need some on-site. I think you need some on-site parking, and having a hard time doing the math just looking at the picture here. So I'd be open, but I'm not sure I know how you can get it. That's kind of my problem without having a few more details on here, especially if you need to have accessible parking on site, and are there requirements for that? which I don't know.
Here's why I don't think the wall can stay. I think they have because we've talked about parking that's not provided on site being provided in these remote lots. Reality is that's not where people are going to park. They're going to park in the law office next door, and they're going to park in the other commercial lot on the other side. It's not going to impact the residences. If there is overflow, it's those two neighbors. It's just human nature. That's where people are going to park. They're going to say, well, these lots aren't being used, businesses aren't operating. So I'm in favor of shared parking, and I'm in favor of granting this waiver as requested. But I think if there's any, but I think those neighbors should be made aware of what's being requested, and just, the reality of the situation too, because like I said, and you probably know, the lawyers to the south, the Veshers were big proponents of your last project. So they probably are going to support this, but they need to know the burden is going to be probably on them unless there's more signage. I know there's a sign now that says lot for parking for legal offices only. So I think, and the neighbor on the other side has a lot. So I would have difficulty keeping that wall to getting parking for just 4 spaces. To me, it really burdens, and also the way that lot's going to work, people are going to be running into that wall. I mean, these lots are so narrow that you cannot drive in and turn 90 degrees and get parking. I mean, so
be driving, you'd have to head in off Blacksmith and then back out of Blacksmith, back out onto Blacksmith. Wow, say that 10 times fast. So it's a safety issue as well.
Yeah, so I think keeping the wall really creates a community problem, because there's so little parking that'll be able to be provided. So I support, because I think the number of spaces is pretty well below what's normally required. So reducing it any more, I mean, we may hear it from the neighbors, if this is a successful business and there are only 4 spaces there, and that street, you drive down that street Saturday nights, the spaces are taken on that street. So,
yeah, okay, I see. I mean, for now, I see it's more of a safe. You're gonna have an issue. People are gonna run on the wall and they're gonna back out into somebody on Blacksmith. Because for me, if it's 9 or if it's 4, they're still gonna park in the neighbor's yard. I don't know that makes a huge difference. But if we change the configuration, you probably run into other problems. Okay.
Are there other considerations, board members?
I have one thing to add that was actually mentioned to me, and I don't know, Tom Holton, the president of the Historical Society, I don't know if you sent in a comment letter or not. I didn't see it. But he wanted to make sure this planning staff and everyone are aware, there's an original fire hydrant hookup at the front of the building and at the rear. So there's 2 of them on the property. And those are like the first ones that we had in the city. They're pretty old. And so those were important features we need to make sure that get preserved and are paid attention to. So I just want to make the applicant and planning aware that those should appear on their site drawings and considerations.
Thank you so much for that information.
So the one in the front is really visible. It's right between the 2 buildings. You can, even on like Google Earth Street View, you can see it. It's right there. The other one is towards the rear. I think it's harder to see. I don't know if you'd find it. But
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, would you like us to paraphrase and go back through go ahead, Nikki.
Before you do that, and while we're talking about public comment, we did receive 1 public comment during the course of the meeting, so I will share that with you all. It's from Kate Vessels at 63 South Riverview Street regarding 3032 South High Street. She says, "This is a great idea. Please approve this project. This property desperately needs help. I live on Riverview and we'd love to attend to these establishments.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, so just to go back through the four, so some of these are gray. So first of all, does the board support demolition of the 2 additions behind 30 South High Street, 2 outbuildings, and partial demolition relocation of the historic stone wall? So it sounds like some of us are definitely supportive. I think other board members, you need to, that documentation. Well, regardless, those who are supportive now and those who are wavering, you still need to do that documentation the code now requires. But I think, and Amy's shaking her head, so if that documentation is provided, then I think you would have support of the board for the demolition of those. I think everybody's encouraging you to try to reuse the privy in some way. I think the stone wall, which is the last part of the first question, I think there's some variation in feelings on the board, and perhaps that just needs to be explored with some alternatives, or show what you can and can't do keeping it. The site layout, I think people are generally supportive of the site layout. Question of making sure the addition is, even though the addition has a larger footprint on 30, making sure that it's still subordinate to the original structure. It's clear we would support some sort of waiver for the parking. What that is will kind of, I think, depend on the wall and the final site plan. Does that help you?
Very much.
Okay. Okay. All right. You have any other questions for us?
There recent development, and I mentioned this to Sarah. We have the outdoor terrace. It came up the idea of maybe a covered pavilion structure, a roof would be open on the sides. It would not increase our site coverage, but it'd be very secondary. We're not talking about a very big, but just if that would be something that would be worth pursuing as we develop the architecture for the site, or if that'd be too competing with the existing architecture. We're open for a little bit of comment on that. It came in late, but I figured since this was informal, we could at least maybe just talk about it for a few minutes.
All right.
That way, I'd like to avoid a surprise when we come back in a month or so and say, what's this? I'd rather just get it out there now.
Board members, any feelings about this?
I'll just say that to me, your building's getting really long, like east-west wise. So if you can not attach any type of roof structure to the other stuff, so something that's detached is more favorable. But that's not the only solution. But you need to separate out that long east-west mass.
I've got some conceptual sketches I've been working on for that.
Yeah, so that, I mean, I think we just need, I just need to see more details, but generally speaking, detaching it from the other roof line and having a separate structure would be probably a preferable option, but it's up to the designer.
Great.
I have no strong, I think if you separate it, it's going to give some break in the mass, so that's probably good. I don't have an issue with a covered porch.
And Marty, you're shaking your head, so I'm taking that for you're okay with it. Yeah,
I'm agreeing.
Okay. And depending on the design and how independent, I think the more independent it is from the building mass at 30, the better it would be. So it sounds like we're qualifying it, but we're generally supportive of that.
Yep. Great.
All right. We'll see you soon, I guess.
Yeah, thanks very much. This was a great discussion. I appreciate everyone's time. Don't stay up too late.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Bye.
Good night. Moving on to new cases. Okay. We're on item number 3. This is the firehouse at 37 West Bridge Street. It's a minor project review. This application is a request for exterior building and site modifications for historic property on a 0.22 acre site zoned Historic District Historic Core. The site is southwest of the intersection of West Bridge Street with Mill Lane. Mr. Ridge will be our presenter, and I'll give him a moment to share his present. He already has it up. So Chase, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so as was mentioned, this is a request for review and approval of a minor project review for exterior modifications to the site located at 37 West Bridge Street in the Historic District. The site is highlighted in yellow on your screen. It's located southwest of the intersection of West Bridge Street with Mill Lane and is zoned Historic District Historic Core. This zoomed in version of the same aerial provides a bit more context to the existing site conditions and layout. So starting along West Bridge Street, which is the north side of the site and moving south, there are 2 small stone walls, an existing concrete patio, the original 1940s firehouse structure, and then an addition from the 1980s sits at the southern portion of the site. So these photos provide a bit of context to the existing conditions. On the left is the structure, the stone firehouse structure as viewed from West Bridge Street. And on the right-hand side of your screen is where the original stone structure and the 2-story addition that came later on kind of meet along Mill Lane. So what you see here is the proposed site plan, and just to clarify too, this is of the northern portion of the site only, as the remainder of the site is to remain unaltered. So what you see highlighted in red is actually the stone firehouse building, and that would continue off to the left side of your screen. The applicant is proposing to install a new wrought iron fence to enclose the existing concrete patio, so that is outlined in blue on your screen. And that proposed wrought iron fence will sit approximately 1 foot from the existing stone walls. All modifications are proposed outside of the right-of-way. What you see here is the proposed north elevation. So the main alteration on this elevation is the installation of an aluminum storefront system, which you see here. That storefront system is proposed to be painted a tricorn black color and replaces the existing 4-panel storefront system and trim piece. The applicant is also proposing a double door entry, which you can see on the front system on the right-hand side here. And then you'll notice to the rear, the existing 2-story portion that is proposed to be painted a brown color, Sherwin-Williams sawdust. Additionally, what you're not seeing here but would see in reality is the wrought iron fence, but that is not viewed here just for simplicity's sake and to be able to see the other alterations. So this is the proposed east elevation. Moving left to right, so south to north, the applicant is proposing to replace the existing awnings on the building with a fade resistant and UV resistant black awning from Sunbrella, and they will be utilizing the existing framing. So those are open on the underside and will retain the same shape. Additionally, just under the awnings rather is a existing storefront system. So that storefront is proposed to be painted Sherwin-Williams tricorn black to match the storefront system on the north side of the building. Again, here you can see that the CMU and brick 2-story addition is to be painted the sawdust color. And then finally, on the far right-hand side of your screen, you'll notice the wrought iron fence here. So the wrought iron fence is proposed to be 3 feet 6 inches in height, which is similar to other wrought iron fences in the area. The proposed south elevation is really remains largely unaltered. The main modification here is that, like the rest of the building, the applicant is proposing to paint the CMU portion of the building here in the sawdust color. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll notice those new black awnings. And really the same story here with the west elevation. You'll notice again that that rear portion of the building is painted sawdust. Additionally, any existing sills or wood trim on the building is proposed to be painted a rice green color, which is like a beige color. And then this is just a bit more detail about the proposed materials, the paint colors in the top left-hand side, the awning fabric color, and then the fence detail as well. This was reviewed against all applicable criteria, and with that, staff is recommending approval of the minor project tonight with one condition, and that be that the entirety of the aluminum coping cap be painted tricorn black, subject to staff approval. So I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have. Thank you.
Anyone have any questions for Chase?
I don't think so. Chase, maybe go back to like your, my internet dropped out for like 90 seconds. I think I missed like the first 2 slides. Sorry about that. Just so I can just to make sure I didn't miss something. Yeah. Sorry about that. That somehow
No problem.
Okay, that was the one right there. Okay, so just yeah. Okay, so the ones. Okay, so it was about 1 foot from the wall.
Actually, I have some questions regarding this. You can just leave that slide up.
Yeah.
So Chase, so can we confirm, is the existing concrete pad that is being proposed to include, is it actually clipped at the corners or is it a square pad? Because the auditor's website and the aerials show it square.
It is clipped. It does have that chamfered.
It is clipped.
That's correct.
Okay. Because I was trying to look at the other stuff and it looks square to me. So they're following the outline of the existing concrete. Is that the plan? So is the fence being installed on the existing concrete or in the grass to the outside of the concrete?
I will let the applicant confirm that detail. It's my understanding that it would be installed on the concrete, but again, I'll let the applicant confirm.
Okay.
Good evening. That is correct. It would be installed on top of the concrete.
Okay. So how much, I guess, are you doing it right on the edge? Is it like 2 inches off the edge?
It would probably be a couple inches off the edge just so that the concrete wouldn't chip when it was adhered to it.
So the measurement that we're getting between the fence and the stone walls out front, that's from the fence itself as installed, not the concrete?
I believe that is from the concrete to the stone wall.
Okay, so
not to the actual fence. It'll be a little bit further away.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to get at, because at one point on the diagram, it shows that there's only like 10 inches between the fence and the stone wall. But you're saying that's from the edge of the existing concrete pavement to the stone wall?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so that answers my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
And the stone wall is it stays as is, right? There's nothing to the stone wall that will be done.
We are not touching the stone wall.
Okay.
Since you're speaking, Ms. Reel, do you have anything to add as a part of your presentation?
Just that we are hoping to bring back the original look of the firehouse with the new storefront system that we're proposing to make it look like overhead garage doors as it existed when it was a firehouse. And we are keeping the existing awning structures as they are today. We are just replacing the awning with a black material versus the red that is there now. And that's pretty much all we're doing.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I think we've gone through the questions. Has any public comment been received on this?
We've not received any public comment on this one.
Okay. Ms. Reel, are you comfortable with the condition that's in the staff report, the condition of approval?
Yes.
Okay, all right. All right, does someone want to make a motion?
I can move to approve the plan as presented with the singular staff condition.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Do we have a,
Ms. Cram,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
yes,
Mr. Cotter,
Yes.
Martha Cooper.
Yes.
Thank you.
okay. You've passed. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Our last case of the evening is the Vessels residence at 63 South Riverview Street. It's a minor project review. The application is a request for the installation of a new patio and walkway associated with an existing single-family residence on a 0.25 acre site zoned historic district, historic residential. The site is northwest of the intersection of South Riverview Street with Eberly Hill Lane. Ms. Holt will be our presenter. And whenever you're ready, feel free to start.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can everybody see my presentation?
Yes.
Oh, thank goodness. All right. This is, again, project 21088. It is a minor project request for 63 South Riverview. The applicants are Trevor and Catherine Vessels. So the site is outlined in yellow and it's just south of Bridge Street at the intersection of South Blacksmith, Eberly Hill, and South Riverview. The Architectural Review Board previously approved construction of a house addition in 2018. And again, I'll just remind everyone that we're reviewing this under the new code and guidelines. Here is the zoning for the site, and you can see that it's historic district, historic residential. These are some contextual photos just showing the existing conditions around the site. We see the South Riverview facade and the original 1820s house on the left. We see the front walkway, and then what we're calling the south walkway is on the left-hand side of that photograph. The Eberly Hill facade is in the center, and then the Eberly Hill addition and patio area is on the right-hand side. Some more contextual photos showing, again, the South Riverview facade with the original house, the walkway, and the front walls. And again, what we're calling that south walkway. These are some existing conditions, photos that were submitted by the applicant, just showing again the South Riverview entry, the existing patio on Eberly Hill, and note that the applicant states that because of the condition of this patio, water is actually draining back towards the addition of the house. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, we also see that area that we're calling the south walkway and the condition of that. This is the proposed site plan that was submitted with this application. South Riverview is at the bottom with north facing to the right. The patio area is in the center of the graphic, and the request is for an increase by 450 square feet of this patio area. And we see the south walkway and the front walkway. The historic house is outlined in green. The proposed materials include Unilock pavers in walnut. The edging is a Unilock paver in mocha brown. The fire pit is a simulated limestone in Salerno. And then the risers for the steps and the patio are an Indiana paver. These are perspective renderings that were submitted with the application, and these show the South Riverview and the Riverview Eberly Hill corners. And I'll just note that the front stoop and the historic perimeter wall are not being affected in any way. It's just how they read on these particular perspectives. These graphics show the Eberly Hill patio with the new addition behind it, and then looking more from the house towards Eberly Hill with the fire pit and the step detail. The project again was reviewed according to the minor project review criteria. That is detailed in your staff report. And likewise, we reviewed it against the historic design guidelines, again detailed in your staff report. And our recommendation is for approval with conditions where the existing stoop, see if I can do this, the existing stoop, which are limestone slabs of indeterminate age, is not disturbed with this project. That the front walk to the house on South Riverview be paved using the original or existing brick, reset in a manner to provide a smooth, safe walking surface. And that on the south walkway, the same original existing brick be used to pave that newly created walk adjacent to the historic house, such that all walkways adjacent to the historic house are paved in that old brick. I'll be happy to answer any questions. And I will note that we received 3 public comments and they were all in favor of the application. So Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks. Does anybody have any questions for Sarah?
Sarah, just maybe one clarifying question. So when you say on repurposing the bricks on the south, you're talking about the whole, let's say the east-west part and the part coming from the street? Is that what the things you're pointing at? Okay, yep.
Yes.
Yep,
this
I got it.
Area
Clear.
here, yes.
Yes, okay.
Sir.
Not just the end coming from the street. Okay, yep.
Right.
Okay. Mr. or Ms. Vessels, is either of you present and would you like to speak to the board?
Yeah, Trevor Vessels, I'll speak for us both. Thanks for the opportunity. I know we're the last ones to go, so I'll try to make it brief so everyone can get moving. But I just want to real briefly go over what our plan was versus what came out of the planning report. And clearly there are 2 very different things. We had a very good meeting, and this is something that we've been working on for literally over a year, and have went through at least a dozen different variations of patio before settling on this and going to the ART to get some input. The first ART meeting, and only ART meeting, we were given 3 suggestions. The first one being not to touch the front porch, which we agreed with. I think that there was some confusion. We weren't sure the age of the stone up there, and we certainly weren't going to propose removing something that may or may not be historic or contributing in nature to the district. The second one was that we cut the new pavers to smaller sizes in the lead up to the front porch. I think to mimic and to better fit what was there before the brick. And again, we agreed with that. That seems completely reasonable and we're happy to do it. The third suggestion was not that we retain the brick, but instead it was that we just get a different colored paver. We went back, got that paver, submitted it back to the ART, seemingly for the approval, and received it until a day or 2 before the submission date when we got a call that we had to make some changes. And just speaking specifically to the brick, and I don't know if anyone was able to come and take a look, but I'm happy to, have you come and see. The brick itself is in terrible condition. Just for context, right before we started this meeting, I ran out on the patio and just ripped up a piece of brick, and about half of it came up. And it's just because none of it is able to hold, it just falls apart when you pick it up. And again, for context, this is the other half of the brick that I threw in a bag just to show you. It's falling apart. It's not in the condition that makes it suitable for even walking on it, and much less spending the money to actually pull it up and replace it. And the other thing that is a clear problem with this is that there's not enough brick. We part of the plan is, and the whole reason we're doing this is to expand the footprint of the patio, all within the guidelines set forth in the new historic guidelines. And if we were to replace the existing brick into a larger footprint, then clearly we're not going to have enough brick. There just isn't enough. And then last thing, and I promise I'll shut up, is that the ARB is approved demolishing and removing this brick before. In 2018, when we had our whole renovation and project, part of the question brought up was whether the brick in our old driveway was historic or contributing in nature to the district. And it was determined both by the ART, the consultants whose report I'm looking at right now, and ultimately the ARB, that it wasn't contributing at all to the district. And also, and I have the language in front of me, it was in poor condition. I'm quoting the historic preservation consultant. That's the exact same brick that we're talking about right now. Nothing has changed. It has not gotten better condition in this time period. If anything, it's got worse. And if it wasn't contributing then and wasn't historic then, it certainly isn't now. Brick from the 50s and 60s, just, I mean, I think that there are people born in the 50s and 60s that would argue that they are not historic. And I think that, I think they're right. I just don't, I understand I understand and appreciate the efforts to maintain the character, and I do, and I think it's important. But I just don't, for the life of me, this isn't practical. It's physically impossible because we don't have enough brick, and we've already determined once before that the brick wasn't worth saving. So here we are. With that, like I said, I'll shut up and I'll put myself on mute and let you talk.
Okay, board members, before we discuss this further, are there questions for the applicant, staff?
I mean, Gary, I mean, maybe you're on, because certainly bricks that you're going to drive on are certainly different. I mean, structurally, they need to be different than the ones you're going to walk on. They still need to be safe, right? You can't fall apart. So was there anything done maybe from staff just to look, because certainly what you just pick up right there, if you pick up every brick and they all fall half fall apart, certainly that doesn't make sense for you to try to find the number that's going to be on the patio. So Gary, maybe you were in the last one. I don't know. Was there something just to get some context? Because for me, originally, when I read the conditions, I thought it makes sense, right? We want to preserve some of that, but certainly trying to pull them up if they're structurally unsound doesn't make sense either.
We spent a lot of time focusing on a lot of other aspects of that application. So the brick is not something, without going back and checking the minutes, I don't have a good recollection of that, because we were dealing with, there have been substantial projects, and so I can't answer that. I have two questions. One of them for staff, just kind of explain the process a little bit, because I'm kind of interested to find out a little bit more about just getting different, how it occurs when you get kind of different feedback along the line. So I don't know if that's Sarah or Nikki, or just explain the process a little bit, because I'm kind of curious about getting different answers, and then something in the staff report. And then I'll ask, before staff answers that, I do have a question though for you, Mr. Vessels. When I look at your current patio is brick, right?
It is.
So when I just kind of eyeballed, and when I looked at, now I didn't pick anything up, so I don't know. But when I looked at the surface character of brick, it seemed like there were definitely some, when you looked at the surface character, it definitely didn't look in great shape. I don't know what the bottoms of the bricks are like that actually look like they're in good shape. Okay, well, I know that's one. But so my point being, when you look at your patio, And when you look at the number of brick that seem to be in decent shape, it seemed to me like with the patio, you could use those. Maybe you have to supplement a little bit, but you could reuse those. Is there not to get the walks? You're saying there's not enough area in the patio to make because they're just talking about the walks.
No, I think that and honestly, if it was the walks, I mean, I still wouldn't like it, but I could probably live with it. This is the entire patio, which is kind of why I'm scratching my head.
No, I don't think the staff is asking for this brick on the entire patio. They're just asking for it in the walk to the front.
Yeah. And
then the walks around the south side. And then everything like your patio and everything beyond is exactly what you specified.
Yeah. That's the way I read it. Yeah.
Wow. So that's very much not the way I read it, but I like that better. So I'm not going to argue with you. I think that and I'm sorry, Mr. Alexander, what's the other walk? The one kind of going front to back, Sarah? Is that what you're talking about?
Maybe Sarah, if you pull up the graphic and point to things again, and that way we can all make sure we, we're talking about the same thing.
I'd be happy to. Hang on just a moment here. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, so let me click through. What we're saying is that, and just to be clear, we'll go through all 3 recommended conditions. The stoop stays the same, and we know that that's off the table, so that's just a check mark. This front walk here stays the brick, and then this side south walk is the reused brick. And in the staff report, I think we're quite clear that we say that we have no concerns with the proposed new material adjacent to the 2018 additions. We are fine with that. What we're looking for is to maintain some historic context, reuse the brick that is on the existing patio to make the walkways that are outlined in tan on this screen.
Okay.
Does that clarify?
It does, and I appreciate it, Sarah. I just, as you were talking, I was reading through the email initially, or not the initial, but the follow-up email that kind of brought this to a head, and it doesn't mention, and maybe I just overlooked it or something. I didn't realize, and it didn't mention the patio part. I don't know about. I'd be interested in what everyone else has to say about that. I personally think that if you put the brick, I'm pointing so you can't see what I'm talking about, but if you put the brick up to the actual patio in the back, it's pretty ugly. I mean, it doesn't look good, does it? I think that looks terrible. And I know one thing that we've talked about, Gary, ad nauseum, especially 2 years ago, was mixing in too many materials and stuff like that. And I know this is a different context, but I see that, and I mean, I feel like if someone walked past that and saw that, they'd be like, did they just run out of money, or did they run out of brick? And I guess I can see the front walk, maybe. I still wouldn't be a huge fan of it, but the sidewalk, the sidewalk, for lack of a better term, and then turning the corner up to the patio, I think just would look bizarre. But I mean, you all know better than I do. I just think it would look
and weird. I think it's fine. I want to hear from other board members about this, about their feelings. Go ahead, Amy.
So I completely agree with the applicant that this brick, I do not think we should use the brick. The brick, from a historic standpoint, has nothing to do with the original house. It's a modern brick. It's in poor condition. Mixing materials doesn't look great. We aren't in German Village where these were 1840 bricks that came from the street and repurposed. You know, these weren't made from we're not in certain parts of Ohio where there's brick factories nearby and they use these all the time. I mean, these are just generic, run-of-the-mill, mid-century bricks that I don't think we need to preserve in any way. So I am completely supportive of removing conditions 2 and 3. But I support condition 1. I don't know that that's not on the table again, so.
Go ahead, Marty.
Well, I'm going to agree with Amy on that one. And also, just for a point of clarification, this brick area in the front of the house is not connected to the side of the house where all the new stuff is. So that does seem awkward that you would require brick on the side where the new stuff is when they're not even connected to the brick in the front. So I'm in agreement with Amy. I think new materials will be fine and that there's nothing historically significant about the old brick.
Okay. Sean?
I'm not tied to the brick at all. On this one, I trust Amy on her historic brick knowledge. So I don't have a strong feeling. I mean, for me, if you're thinking that historically tied the thing together, for me, the front walk was the only one I really thought made any sense. But for me, if it's not in a historic way, mixing materials and something that the homeowner is going to have to maintain for the next 20 years, for me, is if it doesn't add anything to the neighborhood, then for me, I would go with what the homeowner would like to do.
All right. I get a sense of the direction this is going to go. Does the staff want to add any comments here?
No.
Okay.
No, I think you all are free to make a decision based on the information presented.
Well, I understand the design logic, and the design logic is as that historic material wraps around the side, which is very unique. And I really got worried when I saw one of your renderings changing that material. So I'm glad that was not a part of this application. So, I understand the logic of what's in the report is maintaining the older materials adjacent to one another. So that's where the staff is coming from on that. And so I think there is a logic to it, but I think the direction that the board is moving is slightly different. So, Amy, do you want to make a motion?
Yeah, and I know sometimes staff likes to change it on their little thing, but my motion would just be to approve the minor project review with only the first condition, if the applicant is acceptable to the first condition.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want to destroy anything historic like that.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Roll, please.
Ms. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Mr. Cotter,
Yes.
Ms. Cram.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Good night. All right. We've gone through our cases. So we have a couple other things to discuss. Nikki, are you still there? Or
Yes, I am.
okay.
Okay. So we do have some communications this evening. Obviously, there were some more administrative announcements in an email provided to you in advance of this meeting. I'm happy to answer any of those questions at the end. We have since last month received some communication from residents in historic Dublin regarding the character of new residential development that's under construction. So I just wanted to take a moment to address that. There have been concerns expressed regarding the footprint of previously approved homes and the potential mass and scale of those homes as they are framed out and their adjacency and proximity to streets. So in investigating what some of those concerns were, staff has gone back and looked at the Architectural Review Board's approvals for those recently approved homes, compared it to building permits that were issued, and then subsequently sent inspectors into the field to verify the locations of those foundations. So I guess I do want to assure the board that the development that we are seeing in historic Dublin is in keeping with what was approved. That being said, I think as we all recognize through our few years of public engagement to amend the zoning code and adopt new design guidelines, all of the projects that we see under construction today in historic Dublin were approved under previous regulations and would likely not be approved today. Certainly not meeting some of the numeric regulations like lot coverage that have been put in place. And then furthermore, the board with the code amendment provided a maximum footprint for single family homes, which is 20% coverage of the lot. So we do have these mechanisms, but we did want to make you aware that concerns have been expressed. We've looked into it. And I guess I would open the board up, whether or not you have any discussion or comments on these items. I know we recently did do a site visit to historic Dublin, so there was an opportunity to see some of that new construction. Amy?
I do actually have one thing to add, and it was a resident who brought this to my attention. And I think it's important for us to consider, and it might be a question, Nikki, that you have to go back and ask. But one thing that they're finding is because we're building in these residential areas and they're building really close to lot lines, there's no room for the staging of materials and the trucks and everything else. And those are spilling out of the lines of the property and taking up the streets and parking in other people's driveways. And I'm assuming that's something that the staging areas of both equipment and materials, that I'm assuming should be covered as part of the building permits. I don't know how that works, but it definitely, I did notice, piles of lumber that were kind of in someone else's yard and trucks that were parked in other people's. A lot of the residents there on South Riverview have little gravel pull-offs that are their driveways, and these construction trucks are parking in their driveways or blocking the street. So I just wanted to bring that comment to everyone's attention, and I don't know if that's something we consider at our level or the building permit level, but it is a concern I've heard.
Certainly, and I think that's an excellent point. We have heard some similar concerns. Certainly, construction vehicles coming and going that are there on a temporary basis, we can't do anything about, but in instances where materials would be stored on someone else's property, that's definitely something we would want to work with property owners to relocate. So.
And one other comment I'd like to add, I do think it's worthwhile. We didn't go by it on the tour, but for everyone to take a look at the house at South Riverview, because there were a lot of comments earlier about, oh, well, maybe it'll be hidden, that long connection back to the garage, and maybe you won't see it from the street. I think it's a lot more evident than people were hoping. And that's one of the projects that was cited in the concerns that were expressed. So take a look at that, see what you think.
Are you talking about the black garage place? What is the address on South Riverview?
Yeah, so it's 185 South Riverview.
Okay. I just in my driving around, by the way, I noticed a lot of construction material is being parked and vehicles are being parked on the back of the dentist property that we've looked at informally with the wall, if you'll recall. I don't know if they've made arrangements with them to do that, but I saw that was going on. And then the other one is the one on South Riverview, which was the duplex. And if that proceeds, that's going to be a problem as well as far as construction, because it's a narrow street and there's not any space on the frontage for parking construction workers. So maybe that's something that first of all, people on the residents who are there can somehow get prohibited parking signs or something from the city to protect their own spots that they are used to using. And also perhaps there can be some ticketing with the Dublin police force if they are violating parking restrictions. So I throw that out there because that'll be a problem. And this new project we just had tonight, which will be back that we had for informal review, both of them actually, especially the one on South High Street, will have that same issue.
And I completely agree with what Marty just said. Maybe the city just needs to reach out to those residents and the police need to go put no parking, or residential for this residence only signs, because those little gravel pull-offs in front of them, that is their property. And I think a lot of these construction vehicles and these additional people think that is just right of way owned by the city and they can park there, and it's not. Like those residents own that and maintain it, and that's their driveway that they're parking in.
Well, then it's not ticketing, it's trespassing.
Yeah, so it's
a different thing than a ticket, right?
But it's not clear that is their driveway.
Right.
But it is, and so I think we do need to get some type of temporary signage or something up there to help those residents.
Yeah. So I think these are all really excellent comments, and I agree that there probably does need to be some sort of outreach strategy, because it sounds like we're having these homes that just, kind of get off and running, and, potentially no coordination amongst the folks that are bringing supplies to the site, as well as, obviously, I think a lot of this could be headed off with some hopefully some neighborly conversations, recognizing that this is obviously an inconvenience, but hopefully a temporary one. So these are items that I will raise up to the planning director, and we'll see if we can brainstorm what some mitigation might look like.
The hard part may be, this is usually something in the building department about not creating a nuisance. And there's usually even regulations of when you can build between. But the building inspectors don't monitor things like that. It's usually another set of inspectors. So, and if it's a parking matter, then it's going to be police. So you may have, it's going to be difficult to coordinate. You're going to have different bodies. It's not our responsibility. It's going to be one of those other entities.
But it is fair to express these concerns to the building department, who is granting the building permits, to consult with the police department about being able to protect private parking areas from being encroached upon by new, construction vehicles and project managers who are showing up in their big trucks and, just parking where they want. So.
Right. And yeah, certainly complex, challenging issues. Sean raises a great point about, trespassing and the blurring between the public and private realms. Obviously, the police have an interest in keeping the street clear, but beyond that can be challenging. But like I said, we'll reflect on this and see if we can come back to you with at least some sort of report back. it's certainly not an easy problem to tackle, but definitely something that as construction becomes more regular, because of the approval of projects, that we will continue to encounter. So we definitely appreciate the residents' concerns and would encourage everyone to continue to raise those up, and if they can be addressed, help facilitate that to the greatest extent possible. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? We do have some additional items we'd like to share with the board. Gary?
On that subject, or are you talking about the additional items? I don't have anything else.
On that subject.
I thought, no, I think that's fine.
Okay, great. So I'm going to turn it over to Chase. Chase has been coordinating with the property owner at 5707 Dublin Road. And we have some information to share.
Yeah, great, thank you. So as Nikki had mentioned, I have been coordinating with the property owner of 5707 Dublin Road. You all may remember that this was actually before you, this property, at the last ARB meeting for some exterior modifications to windows and doors on the property. So unfortunately, I'm tasked with giving some, not so fun news this evening. Staff was made aware that on this property, 5707 Dublin Road, there were two accessory structures, historic accessory structures that were demolished without, review and approval through the ARB. And so this property, just to recap, it's not located within the historic district, but is on Appendix G, and so is an outlying historic property. Any modifications to the exterior of the primary structure as well as to the site do require that review and approval from the Architectural Review Board. So in short, that did not happen. Obviously, staff encourages homeowners to reach out anytime any sort of modification, whether that be to the primary structure, an accessory structure, to the site in general. We encourage residents to reach out to us, and that doesn't always happen. So in this case, that's what happened. Staff was not reached out to on this particular matter, and these structures came down. So obviously, it's unfortunate and sad to lose any historic structure, no matter the size. In this case, the two structures that were demolished were a historic spring house and then a chicken coop. So, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have. I know there may be some questions on this matter. But I wanted to keep it high level to start here. So any questions you have, I'm happy to answer.
This is the same house with the privacy fence that was installed without approval?
That's correct. And so just for some background on that matter, the homeowner has agreed to take down the fencing that was installed while they have owned the home. So we're in the process of kind of working through that, but that is to come down in approximately the next month.
Was the spring house and the chicken coop just demolished and thrown away, or?
So I'm not quite sure on the details of what was done with the materials necessarily, but they were demolished without, anyone on staff's knowledge.
That's the one with the shared driveway.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
And maybe just for me, what does that actually mean? I mean, is there some repercussion to the homeowner? I guess I don't know what, because it's certainly a violation of the code, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the section of code, the code enforcement section of code speaks to issues such as this. And so that section of code identifies it, this occurrence as a minor misdemeanor. And so that comes with a penalty of $100 per violation. So in this case, it would be 2 violations for a total of $200. I'd also share that, you know, in our working with the legal team, we've essentially been advised to not proceed with that charge of the minor misdemeanor. So that's the direction at this time.
Well, I heard about this today as we prepared for the meeting. I say you should proceed. I don't care how much time it takes. Just because the legal costs, it's the principle here. And just because the time of the attorney, I think these people need to be publicly, will it go before mayor's court?
I'm not quite sure on that process yet, Nikki. Yes.
Yeah, I think they need to be shamed. I mean, and then we need to look at increasing that penalty. I mean, the other historic districts in the city, those people would be in environmental court. I mean, there's a suit in Bexley for a lawsuit now for people not following what the Architectural Review Board told them as they were building a project. So now we didn't see this before, but I think it also provides a disincentive for other people to copy this behavior.
Yeah, and I mean, we certainly appreciate that feedback, and that's something we can take back and share with our legal counsel. What I
share it with the mayor, I would say, I would go, I think, and maybe we need to share that with the mayor and the council and bypass the legal people, because you know they're looking at it from a different point of view, and I'm looking at it as the principle and supporting what we do and what we believe in.
Well, I agree, Gary. I think with your idea that the penalties maybe need to be looked at so that it's, I don't know if there's a provision in the criminal code or in the zoning code that prohibits, or in another area where it prohibits the intentional destruction of historic property. Having said that, it's the, it is the city attorney's responsibility to determine whether a case should be prosecuted, not the ARB's. So I have to respect their decision not to prosecute. The third part on this one is this property is for sale. So the property owner may be disinterested. And I think your point about discouraging other people, I mean, $100 or $200 isn't going to make or break somebody who is selling their house for the kind of money they're asking on that property. But I do think that you bring a good point about discouraging other people from just acting and pretending that they didn't know that that was something they had to get permission for, because that I could see happening again. And so I would be very much in favor of recommending maybe a revision of that provision of our law and how to address that, but as a more serious consequence.
I'll give you one other, I want to hear Amy's point of view on this. But I'll give you one other piece of information I didn't share with you. And so Nikki shared this with me earlier today, that the legal rationale of not going forward is based on the hours that it would take. So it's based on the legwork involved. Essentially, the billable hours to the city are going to be, that's the impression I had from our conversation, are going to be much greater than the compensation the city gets back. And to me, that's not good grounds to make a decision. Not in the position the city's in.
Yeah, and Gary, maybe to that point, you know, certainly there is always, right, a cost benefit analysis, and and those sorts of things. I think we're always, from a planning perspective, looking for a collaborative solution and to not pursue a process unnecessarily. I get the impression that the law director's office advised us that basically pursuing this process would, you know, not be particularly fruitful. Although, you know, I do agree that there is a code for a reason, and you know, as a planner and a preservationist, enforcing that code to the fullest extent is, you know, professionally something that I certainly agree with. I can't speak for others, but we will definitely take that back. I don't want anyone to come away with it was purely based on cost, but you know, that's certainly a factor. The process that goes along with it is potentially not worth the process, I guess.
Well, I can be appreciative of that, because you can also get a bad decision. So perhaps because there was no prior notification, I'm not sure how this information came up about it being destroyed or removed without us knowing. But that can all be a factor for determination of the violation and also the consequence. And so it's a very, I don't want to presume, I certainly wouldn't presume that the law director's decision was solely because, or the city's council's decision was solely based upon how much it was going to cost for the law director, you know, to pay them for those hours. But a cost benefit ratio analysis is always important on any litigation. And then there's also the risk of what it means to the future. But I do think worth the time and effort of legal counsel to look into implementing stricter consequences or stricter penalties for violating the failure to get the permit is a really good idea.
Yeah, I agree with Marty. It's going to be a waste of time and money to pursue $200 from these people. But I think the lesson learned out of this is we need to start a process of figuring out our penalties and strengthening our penalties for not following these demolition requirements we have. But there's also another component of educating people that they have that responsibility, particularly the Appendix G properties. You know, these outlaying properties that have perhaps transferred ownership in recent years, they probably have no idea that they have to follow the ARB. So there's an educational component to that.
That could also be something as a recorded notice, you know, to say that they didn't have some kind of recorded notice because they are, you know, our area is defined and that's recorded in our rules, etc. But I don't know if there's like, you know, the friendly letter or whatever when property transfers that goes out to the property owner that says, just a reminder, this property is within the architectural or the historic district and is subject to these regulations. That I don't know if that's too cumbersome or what.
So I mean, that's certainly not too cumbersome and definitely something we can do. You know, as a city and as a planning staff, we're always looking for opportunities to go above and beyond. You know, to staff's knowledge, these property owners were aware of the historic status of their property. We've heard that their perception was that the home was subject to the Architectural Review Board's consideration, but the site and other structures may not have been. You know, so clearly there's potentially a learning opportunity there. I will speak for staff that amending the, the penalty to go along with our revised demolition criteria seems to be exceptionally critical. Because, what is a revised code without an enforcement mechanism? I do think it is really truly unfortunate that once these historic structures are gone, we cannot get them back, which I think is why it's so critical to protect these resources. And I wish we had better news, and I wish that we could bring them back, because it really is the agricultural character of our community, which I think is why in these conversations we have with the board, these outbuildings are so important to us, even though they seem very secondary or ancillary to the conversation. So it's a lot to reflect on. We honestly, as staff, wrestled with, how do we raise this with the board? Should the homeowner be required to come to the board with a demolition application? Ultimately, we decided that obviously we would not recommend approval of that, and we wouldn't want to put the board in a position where you had to make a determination or to accept something that is really unacceptable. So ultimately, this is the means for conveying the message.
Well, I appreciate hearing about this unfortunate set of circumstances, and that's it. It's an unfortunate set of circumstances.
Well, it sounds like other than the revision for future offenders, it's out of our hands anyways.
Okay. Any other final thoughts, Sean? No.
For that, no. I mean, no matter what you make the penalty, if you don't prosecute them, it doesn't matter.
Well, beyond that, $200 is not.
Neither is 2,000, I don't think. So you have to decide.
You're right.
So you have to decide.
What is the proper penalty? Because you can't recreate the history. But you can't.
Maybe that's an opportunity for both staff and this board to research some other communities in Central Ohio to figure out what the recourse is and the penalty associated with that. I mean, there are, as Gary's pointed out, many other historic districts that are doing preservation exceptionally well. So, kind of make lemons. Or lemons have lemons.
Yeah, but I still think it's education, right? People have to know that they have a responsibility, right?
Yeah, there's education.
Yeah, if they don't know that, if you tell them that and then they tear it down, then I think that is that is a different recourse than somebody said. If it was true that they didn't know the chicken house was historic and they tear it down, and you tell them afterwards, then that's okay. That's kind of shame on everybody, right?
But technically, any demolition, they need a demolition permit. So in most communities, you have to get a demolition permit.
Tear down a chicken coop? I probably doubt it.
There's a structure. Well, what were the two? Chicken coop, and what was the other one?
Spring house.
I think it depends how big it is, but you may need that may qualify as requiring a demolition permit.
Well, if it wasn't condemned, but it looked like it should have been, I don't know. They have a possible argument that they didn't know they needed to have permission to demolition something that was perhaps in a condition of such disrepair. We don't know if it was willful on their part. We know that constructing the privacy fence and painting it blue and wood and all that was willful. They didn't just, come out there and say, oh, well. So yeah, it's unfortunate. It's an unfortunate situation, but, and it is a good learning experience. And to the extent that the city, through various means as we've discussed, can educate people that there are additional requirements when you are dealing with a property that is subject to the historic district, whether it's the core district or the and the additional properties, the Appendix G.
Okay. Well, I know that's a lot to chew on, but I appreciate you all taking a moment.
You're going to leave that project for Sarah to work on?
Yes. 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 She already has ideas. Yeah. Yeah. So as we talk about some more kind of administrative things, you may have seen in our latest packet email that you do have some upcoming training. If you've not already received those emails from Cornerstone, you are being assigned a required Ohio ethics training that will need to be completed. And then you're also being assigned through Cornerstone a required diversity, equity, and inclusion training that you'll also need to complete. I will say from personal experience, the diversity, equity, and inclusion training is a little bit more labor intensive because it's very small pieces. So it's nice because you can take breaks, but it also means you really have to be diligent about advancing the content. So I found the previous training to be a little more hit play and take it in. Depending on your learning style, one might work for you better than the other. The other important thing to keep in mind is that subsequent to completing that virtual diversity, equity, and inclusion training, we're going to be facilitating some small group conversations. Those won't be board meetings, they won't be commission meetings, but just so you all have access to a third-party facilitator to ask any questions that you may have and kind of just bounce ideas off of other appointed members of the city. So are there any questions, concerns?
The dates of the online or the in-person one are not in this email, right? I'm just looking. So that'll come later. Okay.
We've not scheduled that. It is very TBD. The clerk's office is actually kind of coordinating that. So,
okay.
So I don't know what that would be.
There is one though that you can sign up for. There's 4 possible dates and they don't want a majority of any board signing up for any one particular session. Because I've already signed up on that one. I think Gary, you've signed up because I could see you were in one. And
I picked one.
Yeah. So the other 2 are on your own. They're online trainings on your own.
And actually, Marty, just FYI, if you do the Ohio Ethics Commission's 2.5-hour ethics CLE, which I do every year because I sit on a state board, it counts as this ethics CLE because she gave me I took it back a couple months ago. She gave me a certificate and it counts. Yeah. You just have to send it over.
I read that as well. Yes.
So you don't have to sit through both.
And yeah, Sean, we can work offline if you're missing.
No, I see it. No, it's at the bottom. No, that's my fault. I didn't read to the bottom. I see the dates.
Okay. Great. Well, if you do encounter any concerns, issues with Cornerstone as those come up, Sarah will be your contact. Don't expect me. I'm just kidding. I'm happy to help. My phone number, my email is still the same. We all work for the city. So we are doing a very partnered transfer. Chase is also going to be in a kind of leadership capacity in terms of supporting Sarah and the Architectural Review Board. So it really is an opportunity for other people on staff to grow their careers, and then for also Sarah to bring some of her knowledge from other communities to this board. And then, like I said, selfishly, so I have some time to focus on work in other areas of the city. So hopefully, if you do end up serving on another board or just an interested resident, we'll get to interact on those fronts as well. So any communications from the board? I know staff has done a lot of talking this evening.
Next month, we're in the old City Hall building in the old hearing room.
That's
That is true.
Okay.
And just one housekeeping, in September, I'll be on vacation, so I will miss the September meeting.
Great. We will make a note of your absence. We very much appreciate the advance notice. Yes, Marty raises an excellent point about meeting locations. So next month, our meeting is at 5200 Emerald Parkway. So that is the July meeting. The August meeting and every subsequent meeting after that will be at 5555 Perimeter Drive.
Okay. All right.
Good.
And anything else? I think we're all ready to adjourn. All right.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.